Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan Porter Sosa, and this is the sound of Sosa. Tonight, we have a special guest here. His name is Brett, coming to us all the way from Reno, Nevada. He used to live out here in Chicago, Illinois, the suburbs, with me. I've known him since I was in about 8th grade. He was actually with me on my first psilocybin trip. Things kind of went crazy. It was a pretty funny night. I actually went into the Matrix. Gave me the nickname Neo or Nico for a little bit, which is pretty funny. But I remember I wandered outside, and he comes outside and gets me. He goes, "Come over here and trip." It was super, super funny. All right, Brett. So how you doing tonight?
Very well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Had a pretty good week so far. I got contract negotiations coming up for my job, so that's pretty cool. But
Awesome.
no, yeah, it's definitely pretty fun. I've been doing a lot of research lately, though, man. I've gotten back to like my roots, kind of looked for what
What
made
are
me
you
happy.
researching?
Um, it's just a bunch of different stuff. I mean, a lot of it, there's ancient history, there's water, sound. Looking into water has actually been an extremely interesting thing to me. It's crazy because strongest, um, it's the strongest soluble. What's it called? I can't think of the word now.
It dissolves everything on the planet. It
Yeah,
shapes our planet.
it has a high.
Our planet
Yeah,
only really exists because of it. If it was 1 degree too warm or 1 degree too cold,
yeah. It can
it
vary a
wouldn't be
little
what
bit
it is.
actually. We've seen larger variations in temperature of the planet actually outside of human existence, and so we think that 1 or 2 degrees is bad. There's instances on this planet where we've seen 10 degree, 15 degree. They weren't during what we believe to be human lifetime, but it's the only substance that can exist in 3 states that we know of.
What water?
Yeah, gaseous.
Actually, many more states than that, Nico. Like there are various versions of crystalline ice, which I don't know, like ice 7, ice 9. Like there are more than 3 states because it becomes like the crystalline structure, if I have it correctly, does change, which creates a different state of ice. Like ice, as we know,
But
solid water
it would still be considered
is
like a
one
solid
crystalline
though,
state.
right?
Yes, but I think in the grander scope of the universe, I think that we on Earth we recognize liquid water, water vapor, and then solid water. But I don't think a lot of people realize that, especially when we talk about ice, if I have my science correct, sometimes when we talk about extreme cold, it actually has to get hot before it gets cold.
Hmm.
Um, 0 Kelvin solid state things, as I understand it, they're constantly finding new states of water. Because when we talk about molecules, we're talking about the configuration that they arrange themselves in. So you could think of a square or a triangle, or so molecules arrange themselves in a particular grouping to give a specific structure.
Cluster forming.
And I believe we're learning more about how water, H2O, can not only exist as the liquid, the vapor, and the solid, but there's a little bit more. Like once we go into the density of stars that have much more gravity, now we're talking about compounds that are subjected to larger pressures and constraints than we see here on Earth. So I believe that's where we are learning about different structures of ice. Like I believe one is called ice 9,
Yeah.
and it's just a different crystalline structure of it.
I know one thing. I don't know if you ever heard of a man named Masaru Emoto. He was a Japanese water researcher, and he had an original theory that he believed that conscious thought could help change the molecular structure of water. He was never able to prove that, but what he was able to prove was that If you speak words to water, you can change the structure of it. Therefore, reinforcing, prayer, because water is essentially in food and water. Obviously, it's in water, but in food too. But what he did is he took water from this Japanese waterfall and flash froze it at -5 degrees centigrade, and then, I'm sorry, and then afterwards, he took another sample of water and had a Tibetan monk chant a mantra, which is just a prayer, for 20 minutes over it, and then flash froze it again, and it gave this beautiful crystalline structure, almost like a snowflake. And then he repeated this with numerous other statements, music. He used Ramstein, and it showed the disruption in the water. It was really, really cool.
And waves.
I'll try and well, it's the resonance, it's the frequency that vibrates through it, and it's interesting because you can see these beautiful crystalline structures. Let me look him up. Masaru Imoto. You can see these beautiful crystalline structures.
There's a guy that's quite famous for this. He has kind of perfected the idea of snowflakes. He's perfected it. He knows that at this temperature, at this humidity, I can essentially, like, controlling the snowflake. Although snowflakes are never the same, within a testing group, if we put it to this pressure and we allow this much humidity at this temperature, it will create a crystalline structure following this pattern. But if the temperature, the humidity, the pressure changes, the crystalline structure will always change. So in some ways you can get like a cylindrical snowflake where it's very long and it's like a can of soup, but sometimes you can find like the epitome of a snowflake, and a lot of that does seem to be dictated by the humidity, the pressure, and the temperature.
Okay, so
So
what I've
depending
done
on all those,
is I've
it seems
blown
to
up a
be.
picture on my screen. You're not going to be able to see it, Brett, but what it does.
Yeah, I believe I heard the largest snowflake ever recorded was 15 inches in diameter, if I have that correct.
But what this shows you is this shows you a couple different crystalline structures. It's going to be hard for the guests to see because it's not
No, that's
clipped in
okay.
here too well. But what I'll do is I'll clip in a picture when I go back and go through this. But it shows 5 different,
Stages.
well, like different forms of the crystalline
Stages, yeah.
structures. And what it tells us is that, hey, when we do these things, it changes water. So water is essentially alive. It's interesting because everything has an electromagnetic force to it. And so
Water's wet.
so with this electromagnetic force, we've identified that when you drink water, you take on the electromagnetic force of it, and if that electromagnetic force is weak, it does not do anything for you, but if it is strong, it actually enhances yours. There's a gentleman, he's a Russian scientist. What he did is he went to a place in Venezuela, and it's supposedly there from Gondwana, the Paleozoic supercontinent that existed. And so he went to Venezuela, and one of these lakes had actually risen out when Gondwana separated, and this water is supposedly never touched by human hands. If you believe humanity is as old as I do, then I think it might have been. But what they found is that the electromagnetic force of this water was extremely high, and just from being near it, the electromagnetic force of the people actually increased during their time there and after their time there, because they had machines to test it. But as well, the people that lived in that area had lived unnaturally long lives, and they accredit it to this. And so what they found was that water that goes through a natural scape actually has more electromagnetic force to it than water that is actually piped through cities. If you can think of water as being alive, it's actually dying when we put it through all these turns
Well,
and all these right angles. And when I say dying, I mean the electromagnetic force is becoming almost non-existent because we're putting it through all these chemicals, all these right turns. But what happens, and what's very interesting, is if you take that water from the city and then put it through a natural escape, like if you do like a almost like a water feature, and it has some churning of the water, it actually regains its electromagnetic field, which I found very, very interesting. And so it shows us that we should be almost piping water from our faucet through a natural waterscape before we ingest it, and never mind fluoride to begin with too.
I think we're talking about aquifers, and I think that the Earth does a good job at being the Earth. And we talk about clean water. The Earth is basically a Brita filter. We acknowledge that there are underlying aquifers, and if you take too much out of the aquifer, then the whole system is going to suffer. But I think with the aquifer, like when you use a Brita pitcher, you're filtering the water through a little bit of rock to remove the impurities, and that's what the Earth does naturally. As I understand it, we understand like a third maybe of Earth's water is under the crust before it becomes molten and too hot. But gravity pulls water down through the sediments and naturally filters out some of these chemicals. Unfortunately, I'm starting to hear more and more as we advance medicine and whatnot about forever chemicals, where now when we physically treat the water, unfortunately, because you took a particular type of medicine that was engineered,
It doesn't break down.
when it passes
Yeah.
when it passes through your body and we treat it chemically, we can remove the waste, we can remove certain compounds, but some atoms are just so small that no matter what we do, they're forever chemicals because we have not figured out a way to physically remove them, period.
Yeah.
And
Well, also
that's
too, what this might be is because back in the day, I don't remember what year it was. I just know it was quite some time ago. There was a lab technician or a scientist doing experiments, and they had a beaker of water and then a sealed vial of a poisonous liquid. On accident, they dropped the vial in the water, and nothing had happened. They put it to the side. The next day, an investigation was open. They deemed it no one at fault, no wrongdoing, even though it was a poisonous liquid. The container was sealed, so the water was put to the side. Out of due to curiosity, what they did is they took the water and they gave it to these mice, and these mice all dropped dead. But there was no ever transference or mixing of the liquids. And so what they deducted from that is that water has memory. As we know, water can take the shape of everything it goes into. And so as well, what they're deducing from this is that water actually took on the structure of the poison, so it was able to actually poison those rats even though it never mixed with it. And so that's why they believe that, it's so much more important than we previously had known to contain our water away from these horrible things. Because if you put it near, let's say, dumping of toxic waste, even if you separate it, you're still going to be getting the effects of it because the way that it mirrors everything it's around. And water's amazing because I have a theory that I believe emotions are the internal water of a human responding to external stimuli.
environment.
Yeah, I truly do
Nature
believe
versus
that.
nurture.
Well, not even nature versus nurture. I think it's just truly the external stimuli
But nature,
interacting with it. And the reason I
I
believe
do, I
that,
do believe in this case, like nature here, as we're adding these chemicals in, like we need nature to push it up because we physically cannot.
well, it's the emotions, because you can feel the emotions move through your body. You can feel yourself anger overcome you, and I think that's literally
Sure.
the water in your body starting to, for a lack of better
I
terms,
think that
boil. You know, people say my blood boil, but it's the water in your body because of how much water we are. That's why you feel so overcome when you get strong emotions. And
I think that's one thing to consider. I can't say because you took a blood pressure medication today, like my parents take blood pressure medication, and there are
had a heart
forever
attack.
chemical.
Your
My
mom's
dad,
taking statins.
My parents both have
Statins.
irregularly high. I don't know.
Well, because
to be honest.
you know that they've actually proven through financial documentation that there was 3 scientists that actually lied for the sugar companies to show that saturated fats were worse
I
than
think
sugar.
sugar is the devil. I think sugar is the devil of modern humans.
Well, no, sugar.
Modern humans were not meant to ingest Sour Patch Kids, Mike and Ike, Skittles, Taste the Rainbow, and crap like that.
There's science
back
that
in the
proves
day. Your sugar was basically like chewing on a piece of sugar cane, and I don't think that the modern human body can process those sugars properly, and I don't think that it's a very healthy thing.
Well,
I don't have a lot of research to personally back it up, but
no, there is. There's research that was done back in the 50s that was actually suppressed. And
I can't.
What
I
happened
can't quote
was
the specific journals.
What happened was the butter companies, or sorry, the sugar companies paid these scientists to show that saturated fats were actually worse when they really aren't. And anybody that hasn't had a heart attack should not be taking statins. There's a guy who goes on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Do you mind me interrupting you? What is a statin?
Blood pressure regulator.
Okay,
here,
thank you.
Let me give you the exact definition really quick.
No, sure. Both my parents take blood pressure regulators. I was at the hospital with my mom last week because she's having a lot of back problems.
Okay, wow.
And they told her that her blood pressure was too high. Yes, sir.
1 second.
Yeah, no problem.
Statins are for cholesterol regulators, I'm sorry, and that's what they're bad for.
And that probably deals a lot with my father. I was going to say,
yeah,
like with
they lower your
high
cholesterol.
Blood pressure.
Yeah, they lower your cholesterol, which essentially will lower your blood pressure because cholesterol blocks your arteries and so on and so forth. But what they're finding out is it's not the actual saturated fats, it's sugar. And so that's where the problem comes in.
I think one major thing with humanity is sometimes I think we deem ourselves too much of a god or something like that. Like, we know so much better than Mother Nature, but
that is so
Mother Nature has given us everything, every medication we have, every holistic situation, every remedy that we have comes from nature. And we honestly don't know enough. We know enough about terrestrial land, but 70% of the planet is water. And I believe they say, like, if we know something about space, dip an 8-ounce glass, dip a pint glass into the ocean, and that's how much we know about the ocean. Like, in some senses, I believe we understand more about space than we do our own planet, and that
not in some senses, in all senses. I mean, because if 70% of the world is water, and we haven't searched that much of the
during the Japan tsunamis, there was a very big thing. You can Google it, like strange fish that washed up because of the Japan tsunamis. Like when the tsunamis happened from Fukushima, there were many fish that washed on shore that have never been seen ever. They're brand new species that should highlight how much we don't know about our own planet. And I just bring that up because as we try to know more about Mars and the moon and various things, there's a lot we also don't know. Kind of like water, as we take a look at various bodies throughout the system,
there are some
we are constantly learning new ideas and new things. And I don't think it's ever going to stop. there's always going to be somebody observing something that you haven't seen, but they're not wrong. You need to fact check it. Neptune was found way earlier because they knew that Uranus, the way that Uranus was orbiting the Earth, it was given something was tugging on it, something was pulling on it, and that's how they discovered it. And I think there's much more than that. Like, as we go, we have a lot more to learn.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I do believe that. Obviously, I do believe the pyramids are older. I believe that civilization is much older than we do truly understand. To me, it's just idiotic to truly sit here and believe that humans have not been around as long as we think, because we've found fossils that date back way older. I mean, out of the 300 skulls that were found in Peru, there's 20 of them with no sagittal suture, which is impossible to be birthed as a human because you need that to fit through the birthing canal. And one of them had only looked like it had decayed for 400 years. I believe they mentioned they still had soft tissue on the skull, and it had a full head of red hair. And so they have genotypes that they match to the Americas as A, B, and C. I believe this one was a D one, which matched up to the Middle East. And so
I think humanity goes far further than what they actually talk about. Like, we talk about, correct me if I'm wrong, some people call it Denisovians.
Denisovians are what they say the Asians descended from.
It's one ancient ancestor. We talk about Neanderthals. Desovians, Neanderthals, Desovians.
We used to think everything was in a linear line too, like a straight line across, and now we know that we had cousins and there was multiple different species.
Multiple humanoid species that interbred.
Well, no, they existed
that
at the same
created
time.
modern humans.
Yeah,
yes,
and then some interbred and some didn't.
They interbred.
Yeah.
Which is what pushes humanity back a little bit further. I feel like people ask the question, if you could be a superhero, what would your power be? I would like my power to be the ability to see time. I wish if I could do one thing as a superpower, I wish one thing that I could have is like foresight and hindsight. Like, I wish I could answer the questions. The pyramids are one of the largest mysteries of humanity, current humanity, and I wish I could answer more of those questions. They did very
Didn't you get the memo? It's
amazing things that we have a hard time replicating today. I don't believe aliens.
I believe in aliens. I don't think
I do believe in aliens.
I think that it was I don't know exactly who built the pyramids, but I think it was an advanced civilization. I don't think that, because so everyone talks about there's 300-ton blocks of granite in the king's chamber, and everyone's like, oh, how did they suspend them and get them into place?
Floated on sand.
How did they hold them there while they got them to stick? That's even the better question. Nevertheless, moving it, but how did they? They could have took away blocks, I guess, but still, it's just the feat of it is just so unexplained. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. I personally believe,
like, if every viewer was able to rearrange my couch, they would find a different method of rearranging my couch.
So you're talking about how the similarities across the world is what you're getting towards, right?
I think it's more a lost technology. I think that humans, and even pre-humans, have always been quite clever. That's why we exist. That's why we're here now. It's a flow of genes down. When people say, oh, I got a bad vibe from this situation, no, you don't have a bad vibe. There's no bad ether. I think that's...
I disagree with that. Go ahead.
It's your genes passing down. The people that had the capacity to say, hey, this is not a safe situation, were the ones that lived longer. The people that were risky and lost their lives, the people that were not as risque and didn't lose their lives. I think it comes down to that. And then the idea of like passing your genes on. But I think
Like epigenetics?
ultimately, through my belief, a little bit, take it with a grain of salt. But I kind of wonder, has humanity gone through a number of resets? Like, for us looking back at the Egyptians, we try to understand the technology that they used, but we just can't understand it. If we were to go back in time with our iPhone, the Egyptians would say, I don't understand this. This is magic. You're an alien. So I kind of wonder.
Well, if you look just like them, they wouldn't call us an alien. They would just say that we're a god, probably. You know?
Well, I think it's misunderstood technology. I think that some people had a high form of technology because back in the day, even now today, we don't share very much military information because it's secret. I just watched The Martian earlier today, and in The Martian, the Chinese company was like, well, we have a rocket that could help, but if we don't do anything, the public doesn't know that we have the capability, and they would never know that we had the ability to help, and we did not.
Yeah.
This is a fictitious situation from the movie The Martian, but
no,
I think a little bit of that.
Saying. I completely get what you're saying, because there's always going to be,
shared information versus not shared information. And I think that maybe they possibly found a very smart way that is not magical. They found a very intelligent way to make these things happen. And we just don't realize those same methods. So when we hear about it, to us, it seems like magic. But if I was to bring my iPhone 100 years ago to George Washington a few hundred years ago, they would actually think I was an alien and that was actual magic. I think a little bit that we don't give enough credit to earlier civilizations and how advanced they actually were. Like, we know they were much more starfaring, and back in the day, the sky was much darker, and they relied much more on the stars for navigation and things like that. So
yeah,
I don't think it's overly ridiculous to understand that they would have knowledge of this, but the way that they did these things, we just, with our own current math, we cannot explain. But I do think in some way there probably is a way that we could explain it, like a different version. We went into steam mechanics, where the future or the past society went into a different types of mechanics.
Okay, so
like they learned a technology that we have not learned, and we learned a technology that they have not.
They went down a different path of technology. No, that's completely understandable.
Electricity.
But what I disagree with you on is that there's no bad vibes. And so when people say vibes, you gotta extrapolate that word a little bit. Vibes are vibrations.
The mood of the room.
Well, no, here,
sure.
The It's okay. Vibrations. Everyone has a vibration to them. The planet has a vibration to it. Everything has a vibration to it. You get into quantum physics kind of with this and string theory, but I got like a piece of dog hair, like embedded in my nose. So with when you give off a bad vibration, you can feel it from someone else. It's almost like when you're on psilocybin, you're giving off these vibrations. It affects the animals around you. If anyone that's ever done it and done it around a dog, they can tell you the dog knows that there's something with it. And so I believe as people, we have different vibrational senses, and we can adapt those. Like, I believe the whole tuning fork thing, when you hit one tuning fork, the other tuning fork will eventually harmonize to it. And that's why I believe in crystals so much. I plan on doing a few episodes on sound and then on crystals, and they all interact with each other.
Be interested in that.
And I believe that it's like when you take one atom, even if you separate them, if they're at one point connected, you separate them and move them across the planet. If you do one to one, the other one reacts still, which tells us that everything is still interconnected in this special way. And maybe there's one guy that I've heard suggest, I can't remember his name, and I'll give credit to everything where I've learned this stuff from at the very end. of the video, and he believes that maybe the Earth was in a different vibrational state, due to the precession and everything like that. And so with that, they were able to utilize the electromagnetic force of the planet in a different way. That's where you get the stories of some blocks being levitated. There's theories that there was technologies that, like you said, were misunderstood, and so these people were looked at as
misunderstood and lost. Like when we talk about Atlantis was supposed to be a very advanced civilization with great power, and it's just, we hear Plato reference it a few times, and it's just lost.
Well,
at this point, we're all playing Blue's Clues and trying to figure out where it was, but
Plato mentions
are we missing the larger picture?
One of his distant relatives, it's actually like a family friend when you really break it down, but they consider them relatives like many of us do. He had been exiled and traveled to Egypt, and a temple that is now destroyed was actually described to him by the priest as their beginning, their Zeptepi, their first times. And
Zeptepi.
It was talked about
that's
how
humanity back like 12,000 more years. Zeptepi basically pushes back humanity like an additional 12,000 years.
Well, Zeptepi is the beginning of Egypt, of their time. And so, it brings them back to that time, but it talks about how they originated from Atlantis. And then, when we've found humans with 2 rows of teeth. The human that we found that had the no sagittal suture and had a full head of hair and still had decaying flesh to where it looked like it was only 400 years old.
I think some of that's preservation. I think the conditions of where you
it was.
If I die in Iceland,
it was
my
in a
body
mass grave. It was found with 300 other skulls. It wasn't preserved in any way.
But the Earth, geographically, the Earth has not always looked the way it does. We acknowledge that there was a Pangea, and in the future there will be another Pangea.
But there was, there
that
was
dictates
bodies.
the way that humanity worked. Like,
but
we understand there was a land bridge from.
Yeah, but that doesn't dictate the way a body decays.
Were able to.
A body decays at the same rate as a body right next to it, and so if it was mummified, I would say so. But when you're in the same conditions, you're not going to see that big of a from 10,000 years to 400. That's a 9,600 year difference.
I believe the way that bones sedimentize, like bird bones, are very porous. And in order for a bird to fly, it has to be quite light, and the bone structure is very porous versus the human structure that is much more dense. And as I understand it, depending on where you die, if you die in the ocean, your bones and everything are going to dissolve in water, and fish are going to eat you, and it's less likely that your bones will be preserved. Where if you're in more of a clay or muddy environment where the temperatures remain cool, it will remain much longer. That's why sometimes.
But there was 300 skulls, Brett. There was 300 skulls found in this area, so to say that only 20 of them didn't decay at a quick rate when all these ones are missing sagittal sutures too. You can't. That doesn't really apply in this sense because they're all in the geographical same area.
When I open up the refrigerator door, the mouth to the cave, if you will, there's a temperature difference from here to there.
Yeah, but 9,600 years. 9,600 years. So one skull looked it was 10,000 years old. You could tell it had decayed at that rate, and then there was another skull in the same exact area, feet away. I could understand maybe 100-year difference, but 9,600 years of.
I think for them, the reason that they acknowledge such a large difference is because of like the genome. When we look at the genome and all the things, we see these characteristics are similar across, and these characters are similar across. And they interweave a little bit, but they don't fully interweave.
But this is just talking about aesthetic looks, Brett. It's not he said just from looking at it, I judged that it was.
It's all pre-human. It's the way that our DNA over many different generations changed. Almost if we look at dogs. If you take a look at a dog from now to 100 years ago, and you take a picture, German Shepherds do not look, the modern German Shepherd does not look like what was used in World War II. If you take a look at like pits or
Well, some of them do,
pugs,
some of them don't. Yeah, but but Brett, the whole point of this is 20 of these skulls decayed at a much slower rate than the other 280 that were found in the same vicinity. They were exposed to the same temperatures.
would
but
you acknowledge this, that if I buried your skull in the back of my freezer and I put one skull on my counter, that those two skulls, even though the freezer door was open,
that's extreme
the
differences,
skull
though.
in the but that's what Earth is, extreme differences depending on where you are. That's why throughout human history, when we take a look at like
Yeah,
the
but
Aztecs,
these things were
or
buried
various
all with each other, and then they were carbon dated to the same time.
terraced farming.
What do you mean terrace farming? These were all buried in Peru, which has maintained actually a pretty steady climate from what we understand compared to like places
And
like
one thing that
the
we see
Sahara.
with Peru, one thing that we see with Peru, because it's a very mountainous, like when you look at the
Well, no, this was in the
geography.
flats. You're thinking about in the mountain area. This is in the flats near the. It was actually more closer to the ocean now, which I mean, I guess 5,000 years or 12,000
Well,
years
as I
ago, you would have
believe,
saw 400 feet
as
less. So that is true, but
I think it has maybe more to do with terra preta and the fact that ancient societies.
that's in the Amazon though. Only that's that layer of dirt in the Amazon. This is outside of the Amazon,
which
forest,
is replicated nowhere else, and we acknowledge as a man-made soil.
Yeah. We have no idea how it was made either. I actually tweeted to.
Well, we know it was made by man. We know it was made by man.
I'm saying we don't know how it was made. We can't replicate it.
Yes, we can't replicate.
I actually tweeted to Elon Musk that we should take that stuff to Mars to use to refertilize Mars. Because dude, you can literally take that and put it in sand and grow anything. Like you can regrow anything anywhere with it.
I think to make that a realistic solution for us, we would have to learn how to replicate it, because we can't bring that many tons of Earth to Mars. We need to learn how to
the whole
turn the Mars soil.
Have you ever replanted grass?
I think some ancient societies knew much more about it. When we take a look at like, what did corn look like 1,000 years ago? What did a carrot look like 1,000 years ago? What did a tomato look like? When we see some of those things, we start to see those terraced farmings where you're farming on this level and the next level is here and then down again. And every 10 feet, the temperature is a little bit different. And at the lower elevations where it's a little bit warmer, like on Mars, in the deep, deep craters of Mars, where the atmosphere can become dense enough, liquid water can actually exist on Mars today. As long as you're deep enough in a crater where enough pressure exists. So I believe that's what a lot of ancient societies did, and why we've modernized a lot of crops, carrots, tomatoes, corn, a few things. Like if you just drop down by 10 feet, the atmospheric pressure, the temperature change is a better. You grow your corn down low, you grow your beets really up high, because beets are very frost resistant.
A lot of that was discovered because they had to grow that way too. It was a necessity because they were near the mountains and everything of that nature.
But I also find that it's so interesting as a necessity. Mm-hmm. We find this necessity around pyramid structures, and pyramids kind of all showed up at about the same time. When we take a look at any pyramid, they roughly...
there's a big span of them, actually. Because the oldest pyramid, the biggest pyramid is actually in Mexico. But due to current dating, they're actually spread out pretty far. But there's no proof that because they found these artifacts near them that this is when they were built. None of them have definitive proof, really. they're all really guesstimates when there's actually proof that actually puts them a lot older, like the water markings around the Sphinx, which is discussed by the great Robert Schoch
Oh,
and
that's a
John Anthony
whole
West.
nother.
That's a different beast right there. But that puts these pyramids. I mean, Göbekli Tepe proves that there was civilized individuals building things, and there's been numerous other ones found.
Much earlier than we believed. We assumed
Göbekli Tepe is
people
around
would be
12,000
much more.
years old, and so there's also animals that are depicted on those slabs, those T-shaped megaliths.
Giant sloth.
Well, there's things on there that weren't actually in the area at that time, and so it's like, what the hell is going
So
on?
how could they know them? How
Yeah.
could they know them?
And
Then that makes me question: was there a global sharing of knowledge?
yeah,
if,
it's what Graham Hancock talks about all the time.
if many pyramids emerge at roughly the same time globally, how was that knowledge being shared?
Yeah, and so it's funny because we've always heard about this these flood stories, and everyone accredited it to the Bible and everything like that. Because you have Noah's, but you also have numerous ones across the world. They show up in every ancient culture that we know about, and I believe that's because it's true. And the Younger Dryas theory is actually helping prove, and we do know that there was a massive raising of the ocean levels of 400 feet. And so this proves that story was true. And so if you get into other things along that line and use that baseline of, hey, numerous cultures were talking about it, like you had said previously, we definitely underrated their intelligence and said, oh, because white man thought he was superior, that everything else must have been fake that they were talking about, when in reality you find these stories, and not just the flood story. You have the story of Jesus Christ coming up across numerous cultures of a divine person who was crucified and resurrected 3 days later. It shows up in Mexico even, as I believe it's Quetzalcoatl. And then you also have stories of these
Wasn't
epic
it syphilis
fights.
that led to the end?
What?
I think with Quetzalcoatl, wasn't it Columbus that brought syphilis and
Well, no,
ruined the civilization?
Well,
It was a
Quetzal-
unknown
Quetzalcoatl.
disease that they can't
Smallpox
handle.
was one. Smallpox is what they believe. They actually wiped them
Smallpox.
out.
Yes, thank you.
But Quetzalcoatl was like a god figure. He wasn't actually like a chief or anything like that. But he's actually described as being, crucified on a cross and resurrected 3 days later. And so, you get these stories across ancient civilizations that line up, and you think they start to have some validity to them. One story, I am a Christian. I've been baptized twice now. I do believe that Jesus came here and sacrificed himself on the cross in order to save us from our sins. I do believe that, and that has transformed over time for me. But I also have found it extremely interesting that you have these ancient Sumerian tablets where they record that there was an Eden, that there was man, that there was gods, and that we were actually in the Garden of Eden, but we were servants to them, and that Satam, which translates to administrator, was the one who was interacting with the people in the garden, and who gave them knowledge, which people like what's his name? I forgot his name. He wrote The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. He believes that it was Amanita muscaria that was taken, that was the of the knowledge of, that gave him the knowledge of good and evil. And so, you have this story that lines up a lot with the Christian and Judeo Bible, but it talks about how we were slaves or servants in the garden, not their.
But I think that comes
Kicking
from
it,
any. I think that comes from any society. Now living in Nevada, right behind me is Lake Pyramid and the Paiute Indian Reservation right over this hill.
Yeah, give me 30
is now
seconds.
known
I'm gonna grab a chocolate bar. One second.
Sure. I can grab a chocolate bar too, and then we can be the same.
All right. Sorry, I should have grabbed this before. I should have grabbed some chips too, but those are too far away.
One moment, if you can grab a chocolate bar, I'll go get one too. Was it ice cream?
No. Oh, ice cream sounds good. No, this one's a Hershey's. I'm actually hungry. I should go get some pizza. But
I apologize. Sorry, I got a drumstick. If you got ice cream, I'm getting ice cream. I
no, mine's a
apologize. I'll
chocolate
walk
bar.
back and. Oh, I'll show you.
Everyone's gonna love hearing us eat. Maybe I'll edit this part out. Ugh.
No, but from living here in Nevada, one
Yeah.
thing that I've learned about the Paiute Indian Reservation, because coming from Chicago, my family had a summer house in northern Wisconsin on the Lakudere Oriole Reservation.
Yeah.
Out here, right over this hill, is the Three Tribes Nation, and it's 3 different Indian reservations that have come together because of various circumstances, I suppose. When you go down to Lake Pyramid, they have a lot of lore. Lake Pyramid, the Paiute Indians talk a lot about like the 6-foot red-haired giants.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing here. They locked the red-haired giants into a cave and like burned them in, or
They started a fire at the outside of the cave so they couldn't leave. And then,
yes,
yeah.
and they were trapped. And it is really incredible if you take a look at like the western part of the United States. Like over 60% of Nevada, where I live, is in fact government owned. Like when you take a look at a map, what is public land, what is government owned land, like most of Nevada is government land. And of course they don't tell you like all the details. I wonder if that could be a little bit of lost technology or misinterpreted, like, because we acknowledge the Vikings. Maybe the Vikings came here, we talk about red-haired giants, were these white redheads here before we previously thought them to be.
Yeah. Well,
I don't believe that there were red-haired giant aliens. I believe it's a misunderstood
I don't think
technology or
I think they were
a
people.
group of people.
I think they were advanced people that had made their way there, and there's remnants of these civilizations on the Upper East Coast. There's a place called the American Stonehenge, and it actually lines up perfectly with the Stonehenge in the UK, which is very interesting. And there's always all these mentions of giants from not too far back, 200 years ago. Lincoln says, "I stare upon." Well, no,
for his time.
Well, that's not even what I was going towards. I was going towards Lincoln.
Sorry.
Looked at Niagara Falls and goes, "I stare upon Niagara Falls as the giants of the past did." And everyone always thought, he's talking metaphorically. No, he was talking physically. There was numerous articles put out that talk about giants being found, pictures of men next to giant skulls, giant people, and mostly all of these bodies have been recovered by the Smithsonian. And during the Native American Reappropriation Act, I believe it's called, I probably am off with that, they actually said they gave back all the Native American skeletal remains that were dug up, but the Native Americans claimed that they never got a lot of their chiefs back. Was the chiefs were the ones for a long time known to be giants. There's a lot of these burial mounds that we find all up and down the Mississippi Valley that we believe that we found skulls in them, we've found bodies in them, and some of the bodies were larger than the relative ones built around them. But it's always funny because some odd reason something always happens to the skull or some part of the body, so they can't get a definitive height, but you can still get a pretty good guesstimate on what the size of it was, and it still shows big, but you can't see how big. And I just think it's funny because
But it would be pretty safe to say today that if I was to go dig up the remains of an Asian person, they would likely have a smaller spinal
stature.
or skeletal structure
Yeah.
than the modern day Caucasian counterpart.
Yeah. And
So I do think a little bit of it's regional, and I think back in the day it was a little bit regional. We had this pocket of humanoids, this pocket of humanoids. They all interbred a little bit, a tiny bit to make modern humans.
Yeah.
And I think that merging of technology and thought was lost a little bit. I do think a lot of these more ancient societies were much smarter than we accredit them for, and we're not seeing the simplistic ways that they were able to figure things out. It's almost sad to me. We keep blacking our skies out so we can't see the stars very much anymore, but that's how ancient people are perplexed. Well, how could Egypt know these specific constellations and put something into like 0.01% perfectness of these constellations? I think sometimes we're not giving enough credit to our ancient ancestors. We have iPhones now, so 200,000 years from now, those modern humans would look at our iPhones and be like, "What the hell is that? That's the dumbest thing I've ever said. It's basic, it's silly." But for us, it was a very advanced thing. So I do often wonder if there are lost technologies. We see certain things, but we just assume that pre-modern humans were very dumb. And I don't think that they actually were. I think that they had a lot more knowledge than they did purely just on the night sky. Because if you were to ask a modern human today, can you show me the North Star? They could not. Can you show me Orion? Maybe, but most people couldn't. And I think 1,000 years ago, like, everybody would have been able to tell you that, because that was the Google Maps of the time. So it's essentially a little bit lost technology. The ancient society was able to look at these stars and say, Google Maps, I'm telling my Uber, follow that star 30 degrees, and they would follow it, and it worked. But if you were to ask somebody that today, they would have a hard time reading an analog clock.
Yeah. No, I agree. And, I do believe that there was definitely something, and I don't think it's just from sight either, that they were able to see the stars better, because even with all of our technology today, I still believe that we would struggle to line up a structure as accurately as they did. And,
I think that
astronomy
people...
real quick, I believe that because of archaeoastronomy, what is it called? Archaeoastronomy? Astronomy or archaeology using astronomy. They use it to date things. And so if you get like the pyramids to line up perfectly, it'll give you when it was lined up perfectly, we get that date. And I don't think that, they may only be within
That's amazing. It's amazing that people that ancient were able to predict so accurately. Very ancient civilizations were very accurately able to predict a solar eclipse will happen specifically at this time in this place. It won't happen everywhere, but it will happen, and we know where it is going to happen. For having gone to see totality in Southern Illinois, the best way that I can put it is, as a non-spiritual person, man, it felt very spiritual, and I understand why ancient societies placed so much emphasis on this event, because in my own life, it was a very impactful, special event. I'm not really sure how to explain it other than it was just spiritual, and I don't believe I'm very religious or spiritual, but that was a very extra event, and those societies were able to predict these things with very good accuracy. So we can't just say
I mean,
they were
I don't even think we can match
limited
the
to
accuracy that they're at
stone or
right now.
bronze tools. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very important thing within modern society that we can predict where these will happen. And ancient societies knew this very well, and in fact built some of the biggest, longest lasting structures that adhere to some of these things and point towards them. So I don't believe some of these societies were as Stone Age as many of us think they were to be. I think there was, maybe they didn't have iPhones, but I do think they had some pretty good technology, far more than we believe that they did have.
Well,
I think we don't credit ancient humans enough.
Well, here's the thing.
And I can't
decay rate is huge. Everything that was built back then that was not built out of stone is gone. There's no way it could survive. Just kind of a marker for everybody out there. Take this into perspective. The Titanic. Everyone, it's on top of everyone's mind just because of what happened. Rest in peace, everyone. I'm sorry to all the families out there that lost anyone.
The pressure,
you are constantly
the pressure
in my
conditions.
prayers. Not even the pressure conditions. Just the bacteria
It
is eating away the metal. The metal will not be there in 1,000 years. That ship will be gone in 1,000 years. So anything built out of metal is gone. We look at...
And interestingly enough, one of the things that does survive is when we dive down to the Atlantic, or Titanic, excuse me, when we dive down in the Atlantic to the Titanic, many part of the metal hull, many things are decaying. One thing that does not decay are people's leather shoes. At the time, people wore predominantly shoes made of leather, and those are not decaying. They are they are not necessarily human hide, but they're a hide of an animal. But the cold and the pressure allows them to stay, where some marine animals have eaten away at your bones and your flesh. And
well, even the bacteria
it's a difficult, it's a very difficult environment.
Yeah, and so, you know, and Joe Rogan, even, I love when he brings up the fact of Detroit. You look at some of the houses in Detroit and you see how fast the houses are consumed. It's just the truth. It's asinine to think that, oh, all these artifacts are everything we're gonna find. No, that's what you're finding from the most recent humans that have been there. Anything over 1,000 years old, you're gonna find very slim to none artifacts, unless it's made of stone, unless it was preserved in something very, very.
When we take a look at the dinosaurs and we take a look at humans, dinosaurs were and humans are non-existent, and we base everything that we know about humans, but not everything we know about dinosaurs. And even with what we believe we know about dinosaurs, we don't realistically know what they looked like. We're trying to reassemble their skeletons, and even though we've reassembled the skeletons, like, did it have feathers? Was it brown? Was it green? What did it look like? It's just educated guesses.
Because of markers on the bones, you can tell if it had feathers or not because of, you know, where things attach and where that muscle attaches to that root and so on and so forth. So we do know that, like, not velociraptors, but certain types of raptors had feathers. That's why it's funny too, because I love when Graham Hancock
But nonetheless, it's our best guess. It's our best guess.
Yeah,
Nobody can say for certainty it looked like Jurassic Park or it looked like something else like modern birds. It's just our best guess.
Yeah.
And realistically, we guess wrong all the time.
Yeah.
And I think there's a little bit more to be learned, and we have a long way to go.
Oh, I think there's a lot more to be learned. If just look at nature. Look at what nature can do in a single petal. We can't even we can't replicate that in a warehouse. You know what I mean? And you know, there's so many things even about our own body that we completely don't even understand yet. I mean, look at what we're finding out about just natural remedies, and just, you know, our body has the ability to regenerate anything, and so with that, there's certain things that stop it. You know, like scabbing over is a blood protection thing, so we don't lose our blood, but it stops us from being able to regenerate our tissue properly. And so there's a lot of things like that we still don't completely understand, that I think that if we look a little deeper inside of us, we can understand those things better. And, you know, you get to an ethical part, and unfortunately, a lot of our medical advances came out of horrible situations with people like, Nazi Germany and so on and so forth. But they're accredited with a lot of our medical advances because they were doing these horrible things. But that was the only way we could learn. I'm not justifying it. I'm no way in any way, shape, or form
because
justifying what happened.
I think what you're saying is even though these atrocities probably should not have happened, because the atrocities did happen, we have a lot more insight than we would have otherwise. So I'm not saying that I'm not saying that these atrocities should have happened, but because they happened, many modern humans today are able to live a longer life or exceed their expiration date due to some of these things that we've learned. And
I actually think, a lot of people think
that's what our modern society has learned. And I believe personally, I think that humanity probably has reset a couple times. Like, I think at some point we are going to reach a cataclysm if Yellowstone erupts, or if our population exceeds, or there's many things, the sun, there's many things that could
real quick
give us a cataclysm.
Hey, I'm gonna pause and give me 1 second, okay? All right, so we're back. Let's see. You were talking about how civilization has restarted numerous times. I do believe that too as well. So I don't know if you want to try and complete your thought or start maybe with something new. I don't know if you've what you've been up to lately, what you've been doing, anything like that. But if you want to continue on this topic, we can sure as well go ahead.
I just wonder how we as humans are going to leave a lasting legacy. Like, one thing that's very interesting and beneficial to us as a modern society from ancient civilizations is when we take a look at like writing, some writings are much more vertical and horizontal, and some are a little bit more loopy. And when we take a look at some of those, it's because they were writing on leaves, they were chiseling it into stone, scratching it into another medium. So realistically, most of the ancient text that we're able to find is often chiseled into stone. So only the civilizations that chiseled into stone can we still find. And we see it within modern society when we take a look at like the origins of how the letters came to be. When we look at English, it's, I believe, derived from at least the number system was derived from the Arabic numbering system. And when we take a look
I think numbering, the Phoenicians are the ones that gave us our alphabet. I think everything they connected Indo-European and Semitic languages both back to Sumerian, to the Sumerian tablets. I believe they both originated from that, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I do believe that they both did originate from there. And that's why Mark Allegro, that's his name, the guy that did the Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, he believes that there was mistranslations, and I think one of the things he accredits to is the fact that they didn't have the Sumerian tablet. His was he did the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he accredited to the Sumerian tablets as why he was able to find these errors, because they were being translated incorrectly.
Which is why so as we try to translate ancient language, as you're mentioning, we're able to decipher one language due to similarities to another language.
Yeah.
So that would essentially be like the Rosetta Stone. I just have to find one piece of paper or one stone tablet, one piece of text that gives me enough similarity to leap from this language to that language, and then from that language to that language. So we essentially call that the Rosetta Stone, the unlocking, the text that allows us to unlock. So there are many ancient languages to this day. We don't have the Rosetta Stone. We can't find it. And when we take a look at a lot of ancient texts, generally we're either finding very old things very old scrolls that are very preserved, or it's chiseled into stone.
Yeah.
So today, how, like, 1,000 years from now, how's somebody gonna decipher your iPhone?
Yeah, no, there's no way. And
They'll find your brick. They'll find your brick, and they'll know this brick is ancient technology, but there's no way that they could understand it. And to us, it's so simple. You just light up the screen and it shows what you want, and we easily communicate. But they won't be able to see that. They'll find an unpowered device that has essentially been petrified and turned into a fossil and is unusable. You can't charge it, and if they try to recreate it, a lot of it's out of a guess. And even if they see their language, unless they have the Rosetta Stone to know that this character meant this sound or equated to this animal, how do we know that's what it meant? So there are many ancient texts that we really just don't know what they say, because even though we have the text, there's no Rosetta Stone to unlock it.
Yeah.
We can't say for sure what it does or does not mean. So that's why I believe there's probably been more of a reset of humanity. A cataclysm happened and allowed the land bridge for people to move from Asia to North America and then down into Central America as things changed over time. But who was recording it, and what's the lasting evidence of it that we can say without a doubt conclusively shows? Because even with the pyramids, there's like one hieroglyph that actually shows them chiseling something.
Well, the whole thing of it is too, it's like you're mentioning now. So say we did have a cataclysm, like we had we have a meteor coming to hit, we have Yellowstone
blew up,
we get hit with a solar flare, we have an ice age,
and as a community that relies
flipping
heavily on electricity, the solar flare would devastate us.
Well, that's the thing. We don't have
and
any
many
way to
other
record.
And as a society that recorded on stone, that would last. But as a society that records digitally on electronics, a solar flare would wreck us. How would they find out?
Yeah, so we have all these ways of recording. What I would like to do is I would like to get some type of outline of history and get a national park to designate it, and we start erecting stone monuments. A stone monument that has our recorded history on it, and that maybe they won't be able to depict it, but at least it would leave them knowing that, hey, we were here, we were advanced in this way. If you guys aren't, hopefully you can decipher this. And maybe even just put a song on there, something that's more universal. Put some math on there that equates out the things.
We have done a little bit of that. Like when we look at the
sent stuff to
Voyager
space.
1 and the Voyager 2 probe.
Well, that's sending stuff to space, though. But so if something happened on Earth, there's no way those people are ever going to get those things again. But no, I'm saying and what I personally plan on doing with my family is, this isn't gonna necessarily mean that we're gonna have this information, but I'm gonna actually write like a synopsis of my life and give that to Luca, and have Luca add a synopsis of his life into it. And then eventually, when I'm older, when I'm getting to my dying age, I'm going to pay and have a slot cut out of my land down in Tennessee and have them erect a story of our family's lineage, my family's lineage starting with me. And that way my family at least always has a way of knowing who I was. Because think about it, you don't know who your great-grandfather was. You don't know anything about the guy probably. You know what I mean? Like, I know I don't. I know of him. I don't know too much about him. But that way I can pass on my family history. But then as well, I can pass on knowledge to maybe another civilization if something were to happen to us, with this stone monument. And it's...
I think there are a few of those things already existing today. Like we find certain things like Stonehenge or whatnot. I believe it was Jeff Bezos. He has like a 10,000 year clock. You can look that up. I believe Jeff Bezos has actually erected somewhere in like the Southwest where like it's a clock where it essentially only like ticks 1 year somehow accounts for the Earth's gravity, and I believe it's supposed to like tick for 10,000 years.
A 10,000 year clock is being built under a mountain owned by Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, and one of the ideas of this is like, it's going to chime in 10,000 years, but none of us would ever see that. Our kids would never see it. Our immediate generations would never participate in that. So it's much more of a long-term thinking. I sometimes think that's one thing that modern humans have lost. I think at the moment we look a lot at like instant gratification. And quite often, many years ago, we would start building a church, and the group of people that started building the church were not the same group of people that finished the church. Like, it was a multi-generational thing. Like, we previously were starting projects that outlived our own lifetime. And I don't think we see a lot of that now. And I think this is almost maybe a little bit more of a piece of art, but that's what that art speaks to me, is it's speaking that this is when you think about this clock, you think about your watch, and you have seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, years.
So what this
goes well beyond what we can comprehend in our own lifetime. You have to think much more beyond yourself.
Oh yeah. No, we have a huge problem with thinking only within 100 years. 50 to 80 years
within your own
lifetime. Yeah, it's a huge problem with us. This is actually really cool. I never heard about this before. This whole clock and it's in a mountain. They're actually building it inside of the mountain, which is going to protect it from natural disasters besides an earthquake that'll
like the global seed vault. It's a fail safe to humanity in a way.
Yeah,
as far as time,
it is, and that's pretty cool. But I think we need to do something on a level of like, hey, recorded history. You know what I mean? So that they could decipher what we're writing, and so on and so forth. Just because I think it's gonna give an extra layer to letting people know we were here. And I think it's interesting
do a little bit of research
that that he's doing this inside of a mountain. I wonder why he chose that, and I bet you there's a little bit more to it. But that's pretty cool. I like that. It's funny too because Jeff Bezos, this guy started his life, his adult career with I don't know, I can't say adult career. I guess I'm saying it wrong. But before he had Amazon, he did a Taco Bell commercial. You ever watched it?
No, I believe until just a few years ago, he was still driving his Honda Accord that he had since he was like 20.
Freaking Taco Bell commercial, dude. It's so funny. I remember I had a lady, and she worked for Amazon. I'm like, you ever seen it? And I played it for her, and she just died laughing. It's a funny commercial, man. You got to take a chance to watch it. But if you get the chance, look up Jeff Bezos Taco Bell. Pretty funny. But no, this is really cool, dude. I really didn't know about this.
It's kind of like the Global Seed Vault. If nobody's ever heard of the Global Seed Vault, it's basically, I believe it's in Svalbard, basically on the North Pole. It's one of the coldest places on the planet. And pretty much every country in the world will send like, hey, we're going to send you so many seeds. And there have actually, as a global seed bank, some countries have actually asked, hey, I put in this many seeds into the bank. May I have some of them back because we've had a bad growing season, a bad year, and we could really use the additional surplus of usable ready seeds. But
wait, for real? That's kind of counterproductive, but I get it.
But that's why we have it. It's a global seed vault. It's essentially a seed bank, and as the climate changes on Earth, all countries can just send their own seeds in saying we want to protect these seeds, they're important. And then later, when we look at like the movie Interstellar, the crops are failing due to certain diseases. well, we can, as we genetically modify things, we can pull an older seed out that may not be, and
Tampered
then
with.
even if it's not genetically um, resistant to the new disease, it's a readily available um, source because we need to duplicate and propagate and
No,
boost the numbers. So instead of doubling 1 into 2, if I could double 2 into 4,
yeah.
it would happen twice as fast. So there have been
It's that
some groups that
Minecraft
have
chest.
actually asked. Yeah, there have been some countries that have actually asked, like, hey, we had a really bad drought this year, and even though we planted X seeds, only so many actually propagated. Like when you look at Las Vegas, or not Vegas, but Nevada, in Lake Mead, there was that boat that sticks straight up. And previously, like it was just in the dirt. Go ahead and look it up, Lake Mead, boat sticking out of water. Earlier this year, you saw the whole boat. You could walk all the way to the boat, and if you go to it today, you'll only see the top foot sticking out.
That's pretty funny.
It's crazy. It's just it was a very wet winter, so the reserves are filling back up out west, and
Yeah.
But when the levels drop that low, when you look at the water levels near that boat, when they're non-existent, you see a lot of like grasses growing.
Yeah.
But those grasses can't grow there unless it's
Dry.
an arid soil. So once it's completely submerged, a different type of plant life has to take over. It's a little bit different depending on the conditions from
we get into water
today
kind
to
of with
tomorrow.
that stuff too, because what they say is that all the building blocks for life are in water. I truly do think if we learn to decrypt water, we can unlock our past. So I believe that water holds some type of information that will be able to tell us our path. We just haven't identified how to debunk it. Not debunk it, but decrypt it. Because even in the Bible, it doesn't talk about water being created. It talks about water already being there. After the heavens and earth are created, it talks about the water, and it talks about separating the water of the heavens and the earth. And so it's like, you get these things that give us these little hints towards like, hey, look here. You know what I mean? To me, that's a big old look here. Water, I think water holds so much significance that we don't, like I said, we just don't understand it yet completely. And I think that deciphering the language of water will unleash unknown prosperous times. And I don't know, I'm a very
That's
big
one of the
believer in
interesting
it.
things there. You've heard about them, like genetically re-engineering mammoths. You've heard of them like rebirthing mammoths and like cloning the DNA and like
yeah.
modern day Jurassic Park. And so one of the
Well, they're
ideas
going to be putting them in
it,
the Indian elephant. They were actually supposed to release them next year, but I think it got pushed back 2 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I believe it's the Indian elephant has the closest genome, so they're going to try to put like woolly mammoth DNA into the Indian elephant, and hopefully the mama Indian elephant will give out the closest possible thing to a woolly mammoth. Basically, how the movie Jurassic Park worked. We're replacing the dinosaur DNA with frog DNA. In this case, we're replacing the woolly mammoth DNA with modern Indian elephant DNA. But one idea of it is that they want to try in like northern Russia reintroducing the megafauna, because the idea is like the megafauna is going to stomp down trees.
Yeah, it compresses it. It'll reduce the carbon in the area. Yeah,
which gives more open area for grasslands, which opens up more habitat for smaller wolves, various other small foxes, various other small creatures, and open up the food chain in a different way. So the carbon cycle will happen a little bit differently. It's still the carbon cycle, but even though we're not trapping carbon in trees, it gets trapped differently. And now that the megafauna has stomped down the forest more, there's a little bit more like reflective surface to change the temperature of the area to
Yeah.
help stabilize
And when you say
temperatures.
well, technically we're megafauna too. Megafauna is, I believe,
Yes,
any
but they're much
animal
larger than us.
over 75 to 100 pounds, over 75 or 100 pounds. Yeah, no, there are. But yeah, they're gonna reintroduce it to Siberia and the
They
so,
won like a trials like 1100 megafauna in
yeah.
a certain area, and to just to see what it would do to,
But see, that's the whole
because we
thing
even
is everyone's so focused on carbon when we aren't outside. Because Randall Carlson shows this amazing graph that shows temperature spikes throughout time, and he shows how we are still within a normal range of variation of our planet's temperature. So we're not outside of a normal range of that. And I'm not saying climate change is fake. I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying that humans haven't had an impact on it. All I'm saying
it
is
had
we
to
are
be.
still within normal range of planet variation that has not been known to cause massive catastrophes. And so with
It
that, I
had to
think
be
climate change
changed.
is a lot more complex than just carbon. But I think carbon's just an easy thing to attack because it's obviously something that we've learned to measure. Um, but I do think there's a lot of other driving forces with it. I do believe that, um, we do need to take better care of our planet and we need to make sure things are a little bit more conducive here.
Absolutely.
I I always bring this up. I had a teacher in '09 who said, you know, what if the Native Americans were so advanced that they understood how to live harmoniously with the planet because that would increase humans' longevity on the planet? And so that always stuck with me. It was such an interesting statement because it was like, oh my God, because they do use everything. They're very, very connected with the planet. They understand. Um, and if you listen to their folklore, their ancestors are the ones who supposedly went underground to escape cataclysms. And then you hear about these four previous worlds, which also links it back to, you believe in time is reset. There's ancient civilizations who said that that has happened and that, cataclysms have happened of each thing. And in my Bible study, we're actually going through Revelations, and I've actually wondered myself if Revelations has happened before already, if there's already been a calling back, and that this is just a cycle we have to repeat in order to ascend. Because I have a working,
I think it did happen, and that's the most recent account for it.
yeah, and so I do think that that God
It'll happen
breathed His
probably again.
life into all of us, and that you know, being saved for our sins allows us to ascend to Him, but walking in His way, living in a way that pleases Him, allows us to ascend to Him and live with Him continuously. There's a lot of holes in and there's no, there has no facts to it. This is just strictly something that I've kind of started to believe in my own head because of a bunch of other things that I've learned. But um, I do think that when people talk about the singular consciousness that they go back to when they have near death experiences, I think there's something there. They've proven that when someone is staring at you, you do have a chemical reaction that happens. You have a physical reaction, so you can actually tell that someone's staring at you. And I would love to test out something that I've been mulling over in my head. I want to take a large group of individuals, have them all work on the times tables, but have a room where you introduce one at a time. They are hooked up to something that is scanning their brain activity, and you keep introducing people, and then we look for the threshold to where, okay, there's now 50 people in this room, and we notice all their brain activity has increased, to see if you have so many people working on the same thing, if brain activity does increase, and what that threshold is and what the next threshold is. So that, because you always hear about, okay, when you're at the gym you want to be working out, if you're in a library you want to be studying because everyone else is. You do what the crowd is doing with you, not even just for personality, but birds of a feather flock together. I think that has
But
more
how do we
meaning.
measure that?
But that's what I'm saying. You attach them to something that scans your brain. We have
So
Um,
currently it's a CT scan, but
well, no,
if I'm
yeah, there's photon.
if I'm giving you a big scan, you can't be working out at the same
Well, no,
time. Like, how do
we have
we?
those helmets that scan the light that's emitted from our head. Because every time you think a thought, you emit light, and that's how we scan the brain activity. It's not just through CAT scans. You know those little like helmets that they attach? They have like a bunch of diodes on them. You never seen one of those? It's like it looks
Yes,
like a bunch of
like,
wires coming from the head.
mhm.
So you,
And they
you can
glow them on essentially.
well that, or you can have the helmet that sits on your head. It's like a helmet that they put on, and it scans the light emitting the light emitting from your head when you're thinking, and it tells you
Electrical charges.
the activity in your brain. And essentially, you know, we maybe this isn't as technical as it needs to be, but it would be cool to see that, hey, if there was that threshold, because I believe there is. In my head, this theory could be proved to be true because you always notice when you have numerous people working on the same thing, things get done better. Not just because everyone's thinking of it, but you also feel like an energy of it. You know what I mean? It's hard to explain, but I do believe that there is a collective mind. And I do believe that we're all constantly pulling on it. It's a little out there, a little, a little.
Well, I also think
But
just because we have X amount of people working on one thing doesn't necessarily make it more true than something else.
no, yeah, no. I'm just saying that like if they're working on it together, you'll see an increase in brain power, and maybe that it's not even that they're all working on the same thing, but maybe it's just we're working in the same vicinity that will cause a brain power. Yeah,
Shared experience
yeah.
and similar.
Just to
But I
increase in brain
question.
activity. You know what I mean? Because we see an increase in brain activity when you take psychedelics. We see the brain going from, these little pins of light to looking like the sun glowing compared to a star in the sky. It's a huge difference. The one the psychedelic I'm referencing is LSD. When someone takes LSD, the whole
But to me
brain
now
lights
we're
up.
looking at a number of individual experiences and seeing the similarities between the individual experiences versus if we all look up at the sun and say like the sun is bright, like we all know it is. Yes, it's a shared experience, but we all know that to be true. So just because we measure that we had an electrical response in our brain to the light, just because we have a shared experience of something else, does that necessarily mean it's true?
Well, no. I'm not even arguing whether the answers we come out with. I just want to see if we see an increase in brain power because we are working in the vicinity of another individual, and in order to eliminate variables from this, that's why I would want all of them working on the same thing. That way, they're having the same thoughts and so on and so forth, and seeing if compounding people into that room actually compounds their brain activity as well. It's not really about trying to prove what they're doing. It's more of just trying to see if how our brains interact with each other the closer we get to each other and the closer we are to working on the same projects. Because if we were to prove that, that could essentially be why, because think about it. Every time someone gets a brain scan, they're by themselves. They're in this room, like you said, in a CT scan. And so it's like we would never know if you put 100 people in a room if brain activity just increased from the social aspect of it.
I saw an interesting take on an idea, I believe last night, where the person arguing back said, like, person A said, like, when I go into a party or when I go to a certain place, like, I read the vibe or the energy. And the person responded back, there is no vibe.
Yes,
there is no energy. What this person was saying was that the vibe or the energy that you think exists, because I don't believe what you think, and just because you get a certain vibe doesn't mean I get the same vibe. So they were saying that that's essentially like your self-conscious talking, saying
it's interpretation.
This is a safe situation, this is a dangerous situation, and if you have the interpretation that the vibe is bad, that's essentially flight or fight, and that people that typically chose flight stayed alive a little bit longer to propagate their genes to live a little bit further. So as we've evolved, the people that listen to their brains saying, this is a bad vibe, this is a dangerous situation, the people that heard their voice say, this is dangerous, and left, lived to see another day. The other people that said, this was a good vibe, whose libido didn't tell them, this is probably not a smart place to be, well, they died because they stayed, and their genes aren't carried on. So the people that got... So I almost take that down to a little bit more of a gene thing. Like, ancient humans, like, if I understand that this is potentially a sketchy situation, if I get out, it's more likely that my genes will survive. If I stay and I die, my genes don't move past today.
Yeah, see, okay, so that's really interesting, because I've always heard Joe Rogan's explanation of people today, and it kind of contradicts that a little bit, but I like your idea. I definitely do. Actually, I haven't heard anything that opposes this, because
fight or flight.
Well,
if I stay and fight,
hold on.
As a human, if I stay and fight, I'm probably going to lose. But if I run away,
not necessarily though, because
there's a better chance that my genes can continue on.
There's two people in this situation, and so Joe Rogan's whole thing is why he thinks society is so like brutal, and why we become nicer over time is because we have these cataclysms that have happened, and so the softer people, they're going to die out, but just because they're less aggressive, they're going to lose to the people who are more aggressive, who in this situation you're saying that are going to live shorter lives. Yeah, there's always going to be the individual that lives a shorter life, but there's always two people in that fight, and so the person who wins that fight is actually going to live the longer life. And so with that's why you get society that's so messed up. You have all this brutality, and everyone always says, oh, society's getting so bad, like with Chicago. Oh, Chicago is such a horrible place, but in the 1920s people were getting gunned down in the street with machine guns in broad daylight. So no, Chicago isn't as bad as it used to be. Rewind another 200-300 years, you have people raping and murdering each other, giving people smallpox blankets, all this stuff. And so with that, I agree. I like your perspective though too on it.
Even smaller, it's survival of the fittest.
Well, yeah, and so the way that what I'm trying to get to is that with that.
If you can't defend your genes and make them carry on, they're going to die out. So the people that had these more fight or flight mentalities were more successful in propagating their genes. So I think it's a little bit of that. Why do humans have a natural fear of spiders, snakes, and certain creepy crawlies? Because inherently, throughout our history, staying away from those things was smart. We learned that the things that were brightly colored are probably poisonous. Well, so almost
things that
the
actually,
same effect of that.
Things that are actually brightly colored are actually less poisonous than the things that aren't, because the bright colors are what scare the things off that make it think it's poisonous. When the things that aren't colored
that
are
bright
actually
color
tend to be more dangerous.
That bright color scared enough predators away from them.
I get it. I get what
to
you're
let
saying.
their genes to go on. So I think the same thing happens with humanity. That we are very different. But when we take a look at dogs, like if humans just disappeared today, realistically, a lot of the smaller dogs are going to disappear. A lot of the really large dogs are going to disappear, and the medium dogs are probably going to be a lot more successful. And then we're going to see like a natural tendency, almost like back into wolves. Like we'll see like a digression in diversity where they become much more pack oriented.
See, you have to believe in evolution for that, though. See, I don't believe in evolution. I believe in adaptation, because to me, we've even identified strains.
Adaptation is evolution.
That's not true though, because if you evolution, I think is bullshit. I think that things can change over a period of time. But Darwinism was based off of tadpoles, caterpillars, rock iguanas, and he took those transformations and extrapolated them. And it makes sense. But
he was able to see them in such a small range where he could see the diversity happen quickly, where generally those evolutions happen over time. So even humans, you and I are much more fair-skinned than some people would be. I'm not saying that white people or black people are more evolved, if you will, but I would
That's
say
not,
that's a little
no.
bit of an evolutionary trait. Depending on where you grow up, you'll have various features suited to the environment that you live in.
So, but
It
that's not,
makes a lot of sense why
so,
people in northern areas are much more fair complexion versus going to the equator where they have much darker complexion.
but you
Having that
can't
darker
show me,
complexion.
so, my whole thing with it is you can't show me anything that's in midpoint. And on top of it, whether, we,
Well, at this point,
and
we're
on
not
top, well, hold on.
constrained.
Well,
We're
let me let me finish my statement, because
sorry.
um, you can't show me anything in midpoint. We've identified strands in our DNA that we can't explain through quote unquote evolution. Adaptation is, changing to your surroundings. I believe we do that, and I do believe changing to your surroundings can equate from the skin tones and everything, less sunlight, more sunlight, closer to the equator. But you give me an Irish person, Irish family, you put them in Mexico for 4 generations, you're gonna, you'll see a skin tone change. But if they only mated with another Irish family and like they kept their bloodline strictly
They'd
Irish
still
and
keep
lived
a lot
there,
of those traits:
they
the red
would they would
hair,
not
physical
change
features.
a lot of those things. And then on top of it, there's a lot of things about us that
Realistically, though,
there's a
you're
gap.
right. I think immediately without intermixing with another,
So that's why it's not, there's
without
evolution doesn't
more
make
genetics.
sense. You know?
But now I want you to think much larger, because that was one of why Darwin, because this group is so isolated in such a small area, these evolutions will happen a lot faster. Like his finch experiments, like you could see them much more rapidly. They weren't happening in hundreds of generations, they were happening within one generation. So I understand your idea of, if we brought an Irish person to Mexico in 4 generations, would they look differently? Probably not. But what about 50 generations? Yes. 50 generations later, the ones that had a darker complexion, more melanin in their skin, would be more suited to the environment, survive better, and because you're more likely to survive, you're more likely to pass on your genes, and you're going to pass on those genes. Like
Yeah. Outside of that, though,
even it.
where are things in midpoint? Do you have anything for that? Because like I can understand what I was explaining. I can understand how that can affect
I think
change.
at this
But
point,
where is something that originated in one spot that traveled to this area 5,000 years ago and has been living in this
I
area
think
5,000
that's
years that has changed so drastically that it can account for a new species and not just a variety of that species? Or sorry, a variety of that, whatever you want, kingdom file.
well, I think most of it would just be a variety of the species. We understand there were many different humanoids. There were the Neanderthals, the Desovians or Desavians, or however you prefer to pronounce it. And we see various characteristics that are more prominent in some parts of the planet than other parts of the planet. And I think that's just genetic diversity suiting. It makes sense why lizards are better at the equator than better at the pole. It makes sense why certain animals are more suited to their environments, because the animals that were predisposed with advantages to that environment were more likely to survive,
Yeah.
and thus more likely their DNA would carry on into the next generation. And in the next generation, it's often why we see like albino animals typically don't live very long. They're just realistically not suited for their environment. They stick out, they stand out,
They're exposed.
they're less likely to survive, but they do happen. So I think those are just genetic advances.
And then,
It's
so my other question
survival of the fittest. The
My-
birds that can drink the honey survive.
So my thing is though, explain long hair to me. Everything I've looked up on long hair accredits to sexual selection, which is because it has to do with like looks. So like, ancient human thought that this human looked a little bit nicer because it had a little bit longer hair, and then after repeated times of that, that's how people got long hair. That shit does not make sense to me, man. I'm sorry. That is the dumbest fucking explanation. I'm sorry for cussing everyone, but that is the dumbest explanation that I've ever heard. Um, Sexual selection to me, yeah, it can make sense for certain things, but it's like, to me, it would start to look more like an oddity that goes against like what we see with like monkeys. You see monkeys who, okay, say, in these sanctuaries when they're reintroduced from human captivity, say they wore a shirt and so they feel comfortable wearing this shirt, they have to remove that shirt before they reintroduce it back into the the sanctuary population, because the sanctuary population will attack the monkey for being different. So that doesn't back up sexual selection in humans, at least, especially since we came from monkeys, because the more different the person looked, the more likely we would be to hurt them and attack them out of fear of them. And so it's like, we have these two competing theories, one we can prove, one that is unprovable. You know what I mean? And so it's like, I can see what you're saying, and how there is some things that can probably be a little bit more than adaptation, but evolution.
But I think adaptations are evolution.
See, I get that, and in our current understanding, that's exactly what they are. They are a slower form of evolution. But in my eyes, I don't see beings changing. I don't see two-celled organisms that look like they're diversifying into something that's already been aligned, and that's what would be happening still. We would still be seeing things in midpoint, and I guess we wouldn't be able to tell they were in midpoint because we would just think they looked different, but we'd be able to tell, like, hey, this thing started off as this, and we can see it moved 10 miles this way, or it moved 100 miles this way, and now it must have been here for thousands of years because we have all these bones, but so now it's growing a deeper nose or something. You know what I mean? And so it just doesn't, I don't know. To me, it just doesn't make sense.
But between those, the ones that grew the deeper root, we were able to track more and thus survived longer and
yeah. And I don't know.
Propagated. That's the idea.
If anyone out there has an answer to this, please message me. Please message me. I would love to discuss this deeper because I don't have that much of an understanding of it to where I can completely argue it, but I do understand that long hair makes no sense to me at all. And so
I think some of that is a little bit just modern humans. Like, as if I was to select you as a potential mate, what does your shirt give you? What does my shirt give me? These are just silly things that we as modern humans see as like attractive or unattractive, but I think there are certain traits throughout history that we see, women with wider hips typically look more, I think there's a natural thing in there where we see them to be a better partner. Because the goal of all organisms, even a flower,
is to reproduce.
The goal is to reproduce and to carry your genes on. So oftentimes you're trying to select like the strongest mate. And although we may choose to go against some of those selections, I think that's part of the fact that
I agree with that. I do agree with that. I just don't agree that, we just boom, just all of a sudden just started going through this massive development, especially when we see, what was it, 200,000 years ago that we see, or so many years ago that we see our brain size double over a short period of time. To me, that's just like what caused that initial reaction. And then as well, too, I believe they've accredited a lot of human variations to viral infections actually changing our molecular structure of our DNA. Or sorry, not molecular, but our actual structure of our DNA.
All blue-eyed people can be traced back to the same ancestor. One person a long time ago got the DNA change to have blue eyes, and every person that has blue eyes, like my father, is a direct descendant of that person. That's the first person to ever have that variation, and then it spread down a little bit. and it's likely that over time that variation will die out due to certain things like natural selection and gene dominance, but it does exist now. It is absolutely
another
a thing.
thing funny about gene dominance is I'm a perfect example of something that we don't know how to explain. We call it a genetic anomaly because for some reason certain women, when they have numerous children, the genes from dominant and recessive start to flip. That's why if you look at my oldest brother, as you know, he looks extremely Hispanic. And then you look at me and I don't. Granted, we do have different fathers, but it's still the same premise, because you can see it, and I've seen it in numerous different families to where you see the flipping of dominant and recessive genes, and we don't understand why it is, but it's interesting because it makes you wonder, with how many big litters people had, for lack of better terms. You wonder how much was actually in there, because then your whole selection and expressions of these genes doesn't add up anymore. You know what I mean?
Well, people in areas that have less access to healthcare, they often have much larger families, because the statistical likelihood, if I have in America, we have two.
The more kids they have,
three,
the
four
more likely
children.
they are to have one survive.
One
Yes.
will reach. Like
But
we
my
see
whole
in the
point with that
ocean,
is
having.
so say they have 10 kids and the first 9 die off. That 10th one may not have those dominant genes anymore because of genetic anomalies, because those
that's
genes have been
something
flipped. It's not
So when
caused because of the way they grow up. It's caused because something inside of the parent, it's almost like it's used up. Like the
I
dominant
think
genes are like, oh, we're depleted now. You know what I mean? It's
I-
weird, and so it makes you wonder if the genes actually change in a man throughout their life. And I have a theory. I have a theory that why you never see older parents not raising their, okay, so an older parent is more prepared to be a parent. So say when you have a child when you're 38 compared to 28, I think that 10 years actually is past, I think, where you're at mentally and physically as a man. When you give the sperm to the woman, it has a huge influence on what you're giving to your children. Obviously this doesn't happen in the women because women have their eggs from birth, but men are constantly producing their sperm, so their sperm is producing off of what is in their body at that time. And I think the mental state, the mental capacity, the mental intellect, your physicality, your body, everything in the state that you're in when you have that sperm at that time meet that egg is going to replicate where you're at. I think that.
But I would also like to add in another factor, because
Well,
previously
that's a guess to me. This is all theory, brother. So that there's.
that's fine. But to build off that,
What do you think about that?
in an ancient society, our genes were limited to how far you could walk. A long time ago, you could divorce your wife, move 11 miles over the hill, and start a whole new family and a whole new life, and nobody ever knew any the wiser. But the way that we move around today is much more different. Like, for example, the Lahaina fires. All those native Hawaiian, there's going to be a large influx of native Hawaiians moving to the mainland, and that's all going to come together, and some of those traits are going to die out, some of them are going to take over, and we're going to lose some of that diversity, if you will, because now we're not as limited as, a bird can only fly so far, but take a plane anywhere you want, then you could be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we're not as limited as we were, as like an ancient society was. Like an interesting thing to me is monarch butterflies. They're migrational, and they take 4 generations. In the spring, they migrate up from Mexico all the way to Canada, and it takes them 3 generations to make it all the way from Mexico to Canada. And then once they get to Canada, they have a super generation that makes the whole journey back in one go. It took you 3 generations to get there and 1 generation to get back.
That has to be because they're something they're consuming up there. You know what I mean?
It's maybe there's something like bees where if any female bee can become a queen so long as they're fed the proper jelly diet, but not all larvae get they all get royal jelly for the first couple days, but only a couple get a pure royal jelly diet, and that royal jelly turns you into. So there could be absolutely something like that, but we now need to consider that with humans. Like,
what's the royal jelly diet?
We don't migrate like we used to. I can hop on a plane tonight and go give some royal jelly to somebody on the other side of the planet tomorrow. So the way that
you got anyone special in mind for that royal jelly?
The way that genetics used to move much more slowly, and that's where Darwin got his. You were able to see how adaptations happened much more quickly in a confined space because the birds with long beaks were able to reach the nectar better than birds with short beaks, and thus the ones with long beaks that could get the nectar and survive were able to give offspring with more long beaks, etc. So I do think that there's a little bit with humanity in the way that we move around the planet today versus the way we used to. We believe that modern Americans, Native Americans, Central Americans, Southern Americans, we assume that they moved across the land bridge from Russia to Alaska and then down through the Americas. But that took a long time with the Oregon Trail. The group of people that got on the wagon was not the group of people that got off the wagon. The people that got on the wagon died on the wagon. And the group of people that got to the West Coast was not the people that got on. You know what I mean? Like people, it's almost like the spaceship. The people that got on the spaceship.
That's a bad analogy, but I get what you're saying. You're saying that, like, okay, when they started this journey, it wasn't, an 80-year journey.
It was a whole different
1,000-year
journey.
People. Yeah, the migration from Russia to America. There probably were people who did go across that. I do think people were here before that.
But even just looking at the Oregon Trail, when we look at North America.
I mean, the Oregon Trail, though, was traveled within one lifetime.
Was not the same. Yeah,
the Oregon Trail
was a multi-generational. You died from dysentery.
Wait,
start over.
Are you sure that I thought the Oregon Trail didn't take that long. I didn't think it took
a long.
Not 80 years, though.
When you take a look at the average lifespan of people back then, it was not that. A couple Halloweens ago, when I moved to Nevada, I went up to
Oregon
Virginia
Trail
City.
was 2,170 miles east to west, large wheel dragon
How many
routes,
miles did they travel per day?
An immigrant trail in the United States that connected the Missouri River to the valley in Oregon. The eastern part of the Oregon Trail spanned part of what is now the state of Kansas and nearly all of what near states of Nebraska and Wyoming. 2,000 miles in the mid-1800s. The 120.
The Rockies are not easy to get over.
How long did the Oregon Trail take to travel? How far did?
And I have some up in Virginia
on the Oregon Trail in one day.
Up in Virginia City, I've gone to some very old graveyards and seen graves from like the 1800s. And realistically, like if you lived to be 40, you were old. Most people died 30 to 40. If you made it after 40, like you won the lottery, essentially. Most people didn't live that long. It's almost like you'd see three brothers.
So yeah, it was probably like a year journey. That's what it probably took, right?
How many miles did they travel a day?
It's not telling me. I'm not able to find it too easily.
And it's not going to probably be even because if we're going across Kansas, which is known to be very flat.
Perhaps some 300,000 to 400,000 people used it during its heyday from the mid-1840s to the late 1860s, and possibly 500,000 traversed it overall. Covering an average of 15 to 20 miles per day, most completed the journeys in 4 to 5 months. See, yeah, that's not a generational travel. But the land bridge is a generational travel. And I get what you're saying by
Yes.
that. It probably took them 1,000 years to get across. Maybe not 1,000, but it took them an extended period of time where most likely they had children, and those children had children who kept
The group of
traveling to get to the very tip.
you started without
But
children, and when you ended, you had grown children.
what about Antarctica? Dude, Antarctica, there's maps that show that thing with descriptions on it. Like, I truly do believe that it was not always in the position that it was in, or that the ice caps were not always in the position that they are, which we know that's
Now-
true. We know the ice caps have moved, and I do believe that the ice caps were not over Antarctica. I believe that Antarctica did have a thriving civilization because there are maps that do show it. People say, oh, the one that connects it to South America, oh, that's just a continuation of what he believes South America to be. I think that because when the sea levels rose, that moved up, the polar caps moved, and that area froze along with the current area of the North Pole. But we know that those things have moved over time, and so I think there's enough evidence to say that Antarctica was a thriving continent at one point.
Well, with Pangea, yes. And when we look at like major large continents, like the more landlocked you are, almost like look at Africa. Like the top part of Africa is so huge, it's a little bit landlocked, and the oceans don't have enough to make it wet anymore.
That's
not
not necessarily true, because when we look at 5,000 years ago, the Sahara up top was a lush tropical rainforest.
But what was the rest of the planet?
We know that.
What was the rest? And 5,000 years ago, what did the ice look like?
Oh, I don't know about that, but we know that there was heavy rainfall.
It contributed to the planet. It would make a lot of sense if 5,000 years ago, if the ice caps were a lot lower than they currently are.
No, they were actually bigger.
Yes. So as the ice caps spread down towards Africa, it's going to maintain a cooler and wetter climate. But as they recede, it'll be less cool and have less humidity.
As the waters recede, yeah.
Correct, because the ice caps are stored water.
Yeah, I do think
so. The closer they are, the cooler it'll keep the area, and thus the weather patterns are going to change. The closer you are to the ice, the more likely you're going to see snow. The further away you are from the ice,
I don't think
less likely you're.
I think that's just a natural cycle of the planet, though. I think that's what that is.
And how long?
And I think
how long have we been recording weather?
Well, no. Well, it's not that how long we've been recording weather. It's how long we can tell weather, and we can tell weather through ice cores. 1 second. We can tell weather through ice cores, and we can tell how much ice has been on the planet. And that's why they believe the Younger Dryas theory. The Younger Dryas theory says that, between 12,500 and 11,800 years ago, we got hit with meteors that, one hit the ice cap, let out a bunch of water, and then essentially refroze and then defrosted again, ushering in this new beginning of civilizations, where then we saw a rise to them again. But with that kind of takes away this whole receding and protruding of the ice caps. But I think that some of these events are detached from each other, and obviously I don't think either of us are knowledgeable enough on the dates of when these caps have receded and so on and so forth. I would point anyone to who is interested in those things
we can
to look at.
We can see certain humans are more adapted to northern climates, and some are more adapted to southern climates, and that's where the genetics, like the more adapted to the climate that you are, the more likely you'll be successful at continuing your genes on. And something that we believe is specific to our time now is we're able to go anywhere on the planet in a day. It used to take many generations. The group that started the trek was not the group that finished. And today, like, you want to go to Australia, and we can make our genes go all the way there, where in history you could only get there via land bridges that no longer exist. So now that population is isolated to that area, you're going to see more prominence of certain features.
Yeah.
Darker skin, smaller eyes, double eyelids, brown hair, blonde hair, curly hair, just genetic diversity. The people that are more suited to the birds with the long beaks that can reach the nectar survive to give way to the next generation. The ones with small beaks will die before they can give to the next generation. So the longer beaked ones will win out as far as genetic diversity. But we've thrown quite a monkey wrench into that, where it's not quite limited to that anymore. And that was part of what made Darwin's experience of the Galapagos such a big thing. You could see the genetic diversity happening instead of many generations in just a few generations. And that does make a lot of sense. If you can't swallow food, you're probably going to die.
Yeah,
if you can swallow food, you're probably going to live. And the people that can swallow food are probably going to give offspring.
The whole reason I don't believe it, though, is just because now that when we go to these islands, we realize they've been separated for so long that, yeah, their adaptations are weird because we don't exactly also know how this climate's been for all this time in this area. And so I believe what we're seeing are just adaptations that have been proceeding over time.
That's all life is.
Just
a series of
sense.
Adaptations.
I don't know.
We acknowledge that at one point life was single-celled and became multicellular. We acknowledge that at once we were fish and we crawled out onto land. It just changes over time. Whatever it doesn't, life will find a way in a sense.
No, I agree with that 100%, and that's where we see things.
Regardless of what it looks like.
We see the planet equalizing itself better. I mean, Paul Stamets talks about it, how we see that when we try to correct things in nature, we end up doing more damage than if we just left it alone and let nature redo itself. It actually, saves itself more. He speaks about oil spills in the ocean and how the chemicals we introduced to actually separate that oil actually cause more damage than the oil itself, because the oceans actually do get large ejections of oil in them from itself, from activity right below the surface of the water.
Natural releases.
Yeah, and so the Earth has ways of dealing with this stuff already, and we step in and make these chemicals to put in there that actually end up causing more damage. And it's kind of funny because he's Paul Stamets is the mycologist who to me is an amazingly intelligent, sophisticated, educated individual who I truly respect and love his work. I think if more people had a mindset like him, I think we would be a lot further with natural advancements and more harnessing of our planet. I think we'd be further along, because I really do feel like we could use mushrooms to create some type of fuel that would be efficient, because we figure out how to make fuels from all these other plants. Why not try fungi? I think we could do something like that we could find something there. Just because the way we can overhaul our body with different types of fungi, and how essentially we are fungi. We're a multicellular fungi organism. It's weird because we essentially descended from them. We're more closely related to fungi than we are to animals. That's so odd when you truly think about it. And then on top of it, it's like we've identified what we believe is genetic memory in elephants. How do we not know that we don't have that? Essentially, you can say that's what instincts are, but I think it's deeper than that even. Between water and DNA, there's definitely some type of hidden knowledge in DNA, for sure. It's just, to me, it doesn't make sense that there wouldn't be. But water, too, I think it's there as well. And I think with us being 70% water, that says something, too. And us matching that water content of our planet almost says something as well. I think we adapt to our planet very, very well. And even speaking to the adaptation of our planet, you look at something very odd about our planet. It's our moon. Our moon is exactly 420 thousandths the size of our planet. And so it's able to blot, or sorry, that's maybe that's the distance between it, but whatever. Um, it's able to perfectly blot out the sun, and then you have the whole hollow theory, which actually makes a whole lot of sense once you look at the science of it. It actually makes more sense than what we actually say is fact. There's more evidence around the conspiracy theory than there is around the fact, which is extremely odd. But um, there's all these things that we look at as naturally occurring that when looked at, you know, unintelligent. I don't want to say unintelligent because that sounds mean. When looked at in a very layman's way, yeah, we think we have ways to explain them. But then once you get into the nitty gritty of them each, it's like, whoa, this doesn't make sense. And for some reason, we had.
But that's been the if society has collapsed and reset over time, it is a constant. We have to relearn things that were previously known.
Yeah, and it's
It's
hard
a
to.
resetting of information. Some of our ancestors, we see curly writing on societies that have written on leaves and scrolls, and we see very straight vertical and horizontal writing on societies that chipped it into stone. And unfortunately, the stone lasts better than some of the leaves and whatnot. So I think there's a little bit of a resetting of society and what we've learned, our forms of travel and the
Yeah.
way we move around. I think the way that we move around today absolutely throws a monkey wrench into evolution, genetics, diversity. I wouldn't be able to intermix my genes with these people, but now because of modern air travel, I could intermix my genes where previously I couldn't, or anybody could.
Well, see,
Um,
and the whole
so
reason.
we're able to see different diversity now than was previously possible.
Yes, I agree, but then I also disagree with that because if we see these genetic markers that are linking these parts of society together that we thought were never together this early, as in the one that I mentioned way earlier, the one with the D genotype matching to the Middle East, and I mean, there's features that are very similar in Central America that are in Asia. So my grandmother, if you were to pluck her and she could speak Chinese, she could pass for a Chinese woman, I believe. And
Now, when you talk about those features,
not just the squinty
are
eyes,
they
but
are they closer to the poles or are they closer to the equator? Because depending on the environment you live, it is very interesting that most people think about Russia, Iceland, Canada, think about many of the northern countries. What color are they? White.
but it's
Because
not even just the white complex.
that's
My grandma,
that skin. And when we move closer to the poles, we tend to see people of a darker complexion because those genes are more successful in those locations.
well, so
Just like we see polar bears in the North Pole are white, and then bears in other parts of the world are brown and black. And it's because they have natural advantages in those areas. Like here in Tahoe, we have black bears, and due to the environment, they're able to survive a little bit better because they can blend in and they're suited to the environment. A polar bear here would not work. They're way too large. They don't prey on the right things. They wouldn't be able to maintain the right diet, and they would stick out like a sore thumb half of the year.
well, see
In the
well,
summer,
there's
they
another
would
issue
become
with that
easy
though.
prey
We're seeing polar bears moving down and mating with grizzly bears actually, and they're making this like beige type of bear. But
because they're suited to the environment. The bear that can blend in better as the ice caps are
see,
getting
you're
more
talking about color
brown.
only though. I'm talking about actual features. Like my grandma, her eyes, the way her head is shaped, it looks Asian. And my whole thing, how I explain this, is how I believe. If you look at the distance between Easter Island and a lot of the Pacific Islands, it's about a little bit too close to the distance from Easter Island to South America. It's almost the same distance between the two. And so if we have evidence they made it to that spot, why do we think that there's no way that they made it from there to almost the same distance of South America? And so the reason why I say that is because I do believe that there is a strong Asian influence in Central American individuals. And you can see that outside of
Absolutely.
the ones who have been predominantly raped by the Spaniards back in the day, which made Mexicans. But
Well, I mean, even if you think about it, when we think about like the land bridge to North America, it's crazy how when we think a lot of indigenous Canadians, um, they have a much browner complexion. Their eyes are much more slanted. They typically have more single eyelids versus double eyelids because in that area, very snow ridden, where it's very bright, the single eyelids where they look through a smaller, it was better for their eyesight because the snow was so reflective and created so much more light. So I think to some extent that's why we see certain evolutionary traits, double eyelids versus single eyelids, like smaller eyes. I think sometimes those smaller eyes are more suited to the climate. That's why we see many northern indigenous people being a little bit more brown. I think that they did, and a bit more single eyelided because they crossed from China and Russia across the land bridge, and those traits were kind of brought over. So when we take a look at like many Native Americans, they do share quite a few similarities to Chinese people or Pacific Islanders.
yeah, I see, I obviously understand that side of it because the whole land bridge thing, but I don't know. I think that the land bridge is kind of like a cop out theory. And granted, yeah, no, I shouldn't say theory. I think there was other ways for people to get over to here, and then if we do truly believe that society is way older than we think, I think there was probably a point when that land bridge wasn't there, that there were people traveling across the planet still, and maybe it wasn't by as
Uh,
sophisticated means as we have, but maybe it was by boat, and maybe it took some generations, but yeah, no, I mean,
I mean, we see evidence of Vikings making it across the Atlantic, and
yeah,
we see that many of the people that went through the Pacific, like they were very good at moving across the ocean, and I do think that that is absolutely part of the dynamic.
they used the
But
crystal to find the sun,
realistically, like the odds of me
sunstone.
and you setting out on a boat and making it somewhere else are quite low versus if we have this land bridge, although it's a lot slower, the likelihood
Of
that
people getting
it'll
across, yeah,
work, yes.
is a lot higher.
That to me, it's a slower but more guaranteed, or it was more likely that the DNA in a way made it. We see the same thing today. Not all boats make it, and I think that could be a thing. Like a lot of the people that populated the South Pacific were very good at moving around, hopping from island to island, but they were doing just that, hopping from island to island. And I think that possibly the land bridge allowed a greater amount of people to move, even though slowly, successfully into the area.
Yeah. Oh man.
Almost like Mars. If people, we see the same thing happening in America, and people walking from Venezuela or something all the way up to North America and trying to immigrate. If we could just walk to Mars, people would do it. People would absolutely walk to Mars,
Oh yeah.
but we can't walk to Mars.
100%.
So right now, the only way we can get life to Mars is in shuttles in very small quantities, and maybe eventually we'll be able to find out a way to get larger quantities of it at one time. And that's kind of what I mean about the land bridge. I think the land bridge, even though a little bit more slowly, allowed a larger amount to get across versus a small boat.
So what do you think about how they've identified what happens to us the longer we stay out in space? How like we have the atrophy and stuff like that, and we would essentially see like our, with lower oxygen levels, we have to increase the way we actually breathe stuff in, And so a lot of like the depictions of people who would have traveled to Mars or like lived out there will actually become more spindly. Will I believe they gave a reason for their head increasing. I don't remember what it was, or their cranial size increasing. And so it's like weird because like you get all these like descriptions of these aliens, and then they have these long spindly arms. They have a larger head sometimes, and it's almost like, hey, wait, are these just humans that haven't been on our planet for a while? You know what I mean? It almost makes me wonder that if some made it off, is that them coming back to try and like help us or something? Or yeah, I don't know. It's something that always made me think about it. You brought up Mars, so it made me think about that, and just the way that they've found so much of what is it, xenon 127 or something like that, 147. What is that chemical that comes from? You there, Brett?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Your video went away. I wasn't sure. Um,
My cell phone died, so I just re-linked to my tablet.
oh, okay.
Tablet has 83%. It's the same damn thing, so I'm really sorry about that. If you'll give me just 1 second, let me close my...
You're perfectly
Sure.
fine, man. No worries.
I'm so sorry.
I think it's time for a topic change, anyways.
For what?
A topic change.
Oh, sure. And now, because we're on my tablet, hold on. I joined voice chat. Let me try to enable.
There we go.
Hey, there we go.
So,
And now, because tablet, I don't have to balance. It's bad. I let this ice cream melt while we were talking because I didn't want to sit here and like lick ice cream. But this is what my...
that's your ice cream.
Oh my god, it's leaking. Hold on.
Oh. Because I got hot. Because I got hot. Because I got hot.
1 second. Wipe my
Da, da,
table
da, 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 da. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
chocolate.
He dutied the nap. He
Chocolate.
dutied the nap. He dutied the nap. La da
Chocolate.
da 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 da.
One second, and I'm not on my headphones, so I can plug my tablet in, so it won't die again.
So what have you been up to lately, man? Like, what's new with you? Anything cool? Watching any good movies lately?
Super cool movies. I'd have to think about it. I got a few Netflix shows. Honestly, I'm just trying to, in an oh poor me moment. I'm struggling a little bit with. I do think that I am sometimes justifiably allowed to be upset about a certain thing. But then there's the idea that, like, that's how a reasonable person would see it, but my dad has, he's not necessarily a reasonable person. And then I end up feeling guilty about it. My dad often puts away, he'll unload a dirty dishwasher.
Oh, man.
And then I have to go, like, search through all the dishes to figure them out. Last time, when Mom went home this summer, he put away all the dirty dishes, so I washed all the dishes. And on the right side of the sink, I had, like, dishes, like, the dishwasher's currently running, and and then he put all those away. So as I was fixing the dirty dishes, he put more dirty dishes. And that's also been a hard thing. Jerry and Annie, who are here, they've been friends with them since they went to college at Southern Illinois University, but it's a hard thing for them to say. He just gets so mad. He got mad at Jerry was just slicing a leftover steak, and he got angry. You're eating my steak. Do you think? And then I said to Mom, we've been to Jerry and Annie's house so many times. Do you think, and I've just gone into their fridge and eaten whatever the fuck I wanted.
Yeah.
Do you think they would ever give us that energy back?
No, but
And
your
I don't
dad's
wanna,
also
like,
in a different state of mind. You know what I mean? and
Yes, and I don't want to
think
get
they
mad at
understand that. I definitely think they do.
it's a they do, and they're going through, they're aging as well, and they're having their own issues. So the last few days have been a little bit exhausting for me. I've been trying to make everything work for everybody, and even though my dad's being an ass, I'll give you a little bit more extra to make up for it. And
Yeah.
I think in some ways I'm justified in having a certain opinion or feeling on something, but then I also feel guilty for having that feeling because, like, if I was speaking to a reasonable person, I could reasonably get mad at you. But my dad isn't a reasonable person, so even though I'm justified in feeling upset about it, I then later feel really bad for feeling upset because I understand he's just not gonna get it. And for a guy and he recently told my mom, which kind of cut me pretty hard. He told my mom recently he doesn't think he's gonna last much longer.
Yeah, that's hard for your mom to probably hear. It's just, I think it's
It's hard. It's hard for me because now I feel a little bit guilty of, like, so clearly he's giving up, and if he gives up, it's gonna end. So I feel
yeah.
guilty. Like, is he giving up because every time he does something, me or you yells at him? No matter what he does, we freak out on him. So he just doesn't want to do anything or even try, and that's why. Like, I almost feel guilty about it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, and I don't think you guys should be yelling at him, but I do understand the frustration that comes behind this. I think
but
it's a
I
hard
almost feel
adjustment, definitely, but I
I,
think regulating our responses is all we can do. I used to think when people said, "Oh, it's
I feel
not
like
what
I
you
need to
say, it's
treat him
how
like
you
a child.
say it." I think it's not what people say, it's how we receive it.
Yes.
Because I could say something in the nicest way, but if you take it as that statement as rude, no matter what, it's going to come across as rude, no matter how I say it. I think how we say things does have an effect because I think you can say things in two ways, but I believe the biggest factor of all that we need to teach people is we need to learn how to mitigate our reactions. I think before anyone responds to something, you should always take a deep breath. Um, and I think that might
And
be
I just
something that
feel
would help you and your mom is if when your father does something that upsets you or that makes you angry or that he may be having a
justifiably we are
laugh.
allowed, but our reaction makes him not try again. So to some extent, I feel like I'm killing him.
Well, so no, you're not killing him. Just maybe make your reaction a little bit more adapted to the situation. You know what I mean? You have to take in
And then my mom's
context.
also getting old, and she's having a hard time. So I'm trying to,
Yeah,
like,
to mitigate them
split the
both.
difference a little bit.
No, yeah, and that's understandable, man. That has to be hard. It really does. I definitely would say
Try.
look more into lion's mane, like I told you. There's research on that says it can help with patients with degrading memory and plaques, and so on and so forth. That helps remyelinate the neurons and look up Paul Stamets. His
It makes me feel bad.
websites.
Me so mad is, like, Jerry and Annie are here for their first time ever. I believe this is summer 5. Um, Jerry and Annie have now been here longer than my brother has, and it's not that I expect that my brother's going to do a lot. Like, I don't expect him to suddenly change the dynamic of our family. But god damn it, dude, could you just be present about it? I know there's not a lot you can do about it. But the boat is sinking, and I'm the only one bailing out the boat. Could you at least hook up your boat and, like, tow it behind you or something at the same? Is there any way that you could help mitigate?
I get the
Even
frustration.
if you really, really can't do anything, could you at least just be there for mom a little bit? I'll take care of it, but could you at least keep mom off my back?
No, I get the frustration, but I think one thing that'll help you a lot is less expectations of other individuals. I've
I
started to have less
expect
expectations of people, and it's helped me a lot. There's something funny that I heard. I don't remember who said it, but it's like less expectations equals happy life, or no expectations equals happy life, and it's the truth. I think we do things, and
I hear you. I hear you. Keep going.
so we do, we do things, and sometimes we expect others to help us with it. But I think that we shouldn't think that way. It's hard not to sometimes too, when it comes down to things that should be shared responsibilities. But even with that, if we just do our part, I think other people will rise to the occasion. And even if they don't, okay, we still know that we did what we needed to do, and in that essence, we can
Look
live
at
a
what my
lot
mom said
happier.
to you and Bob. Like my mom's literally, she knows. My mom has literally said, like, we've talked
Don't
about it.
yeah, don't.
She feels trapped. I feel trapped in a way. Um, I feel when I moved here, my statement was overnight I became a parent and I'm living three roles all at the same time. I am the child first and foremost. I always have been. I am the child, number one. Number two, my dad's not exactly the same person that he is now. So I have to step up and be my dad in a way for my mom.
I would say you have to be the
And then
man of the house, not
number
the man of the
and then
house.
number
Probably a better way to
three,
say
I
it.
feel like my mom is somewhat in this. They're both aging. They're not young, so I feel like I'm fulfilling the role of first and foremost. I always have been, and I will always be the child. But I think that for my mom, I've had to step up and become the husband a little bit. And then when it comes to both of them, I do feel in some way
Okay, you
like
gotta,
the.
because I know the way people are gonna react with what you just said, with you being the husband. Explain that a little bit more.
Hold on. Can you pause the video? It's breaking up real bad.
Yeah,
And
one
it's
second.
done this during our chat, but
All right.
it's almost like those times when just for like 3 minutes I just shake my head because I know it's going to clear.
All right, give me 1 second here. We'll be right back, folks.
It's not that I necessarily have an expectation from Jimmy. Just the one thing that I have said is because he did this with my grandfather.
Yeah.
Jimmy, Papa lived a hat. You've been there. It didn't take that long to get there. And then Jimmy's like, oh, you're so lucky that you got to see Papa like as Papa. And I was like, you could have saw him anytime you wanted. You just had to go there. And Jason and Jeff would have taken you to a movie, smoked you out, given you shots of Hennessy, and taken care of you, and played Call of Duty and all that shit that you said. Now he says, oh, I wish I'd have smoked pot with. You could have had all that. All you had to do was show up. I'm
Jason
not
and Jeff,
lucky.
man, I remember that.
I'm not lucky for participating in my life. So that's my thing. That's the P word. That's the big problem in my family right now.
Yeah.
Jimmy is the P word. It's not my fault if you're not present. Jimmy, I'm not asking you necessarily to help me other than just being present. And when I come at you saying, this is a thing, I need you to know that it's real.
Yeah. It's how you feel. You know what I mean? And so that's what.
I need a word. And for him, it's an idea.
Yeah.
For me, it's a reality. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna go get a new water, and we can start it back up.
I already started it back up. My bad.
Oh, well, we can share topics. The other thing that made me very frustrated with my brother was when I came home, although I didn't see you, when we moved here, since my dad had just had 4 mini strokes in a day, and then shortly after that he was supposed to have triple bypass, but only a double bypass. So while my mom and I drove 2,000 miles to Nevada, we put him on a plane to Jerry and Annie, and they're the people currently visiting. And then we picked him up there, and from Salt Lake City, Utah to Reno, it's only about 8.5 hours. It's a really boring drive, but at least you get to go through the salt flats. That's pretty cool. Can go past Battle Mountain. It's historical. We didn't want to have him sitting upright in a car with his chest wired shut for multiple days eating McDonald's.
Yeah, no.
And my uncle Rick, during COVID, I looked out this window like I'm just sitting here watching TV or playing video games or something, and all of a sudden I see like a little RV, a Winnebago pull up, and out steps my Aunt Sarah's Mexican ass, born in Mexico City, Mexico, the best cook I've ever had food from. Her big old butt steps out, and I literally said, "Oh my God," out loud. Like, I literally, in my room alone, just was like, "Oh my God." And then I walked outside, and there was like, "Where's your mom and dad? We're here to surprise them. They're not here right now, so you need to drive around the block until I call you back, and then you try this again." We went home to Chicago, and I often dog sat for my cousin in Wheaton. And we went to Wheaton, took a half hour from where we lived to get to Wheaton. We were there for roughly an hour and a half, 2 hours. And on the way back, my mom cried because she did not get to spend enough time with her sister. And she called my brother and asked, what would you guys like for dinner? How hungry are you guys? What would you like us to pick up on our way over to you? How much did you get done? And Jimmy's response was just, Mom, I had to walk away. I can't handle it. I had to walk away. I personally got so frustrated just because, as it's just me and Jimmy, like I've had the ball in my hand for like a year and a half, 2 years now, and I've been taking care of it. And you had the ball for 4 hours, and it was too heavy.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, I understand that, like, I've had more time to learn how this goes. I think it's difficult depending on the family. There's a gentleman down the street, Art, who's had many problems. Also had strokes. I think the way that a family deals with it is different, and I hope to some people I would just hope to communicate like a little bit of understanding and humility. Like, it's not the same for everybody. Like, the closer you are to it,
the more it affects you.
Like radiation, the closer you are to Chernobyl, the more likely you are to get radiation poisoning. Not that I'm saying it's radiation, and I personally choose to stay close to him because it's your family, it's your parents, and I believe you should do the best you can for them.
Yeah.
But I think some people perceive it differently, and I think it's hard. One thing that makes me sad is I think when people see my dad for the first time, which they are now, which was hard for me the last couple of days. Like, I was exhausted and I was emotionally worn out, and I had to sleep for a while because they're having realizations about where he's at, and it's hitting home for them. It already hit home for me, and it's hard for me to see it hit home for other people. Like, even my mother has been a difficult thing with that. Like, I feel like I went through the grief process a lot faster, and I became...
You've known
more
him
realistic.
for a shorter time than she has, so it could, it's going to hit home differently, and the relationship is different. You know what I mean? Where you may have known him for you.
First and
It,
foremost, I'm
well, in all reality, you've only known him for what, 20 years? You know what I mean?
well, I mean, my dad and
Well,
I am.
well, you get what I'm saying, though. No, but you get what I'm saying, like your adult life.
But I never knew who he was then. You know what I mean? Like he
Well,
had a whole life
well, that's what I'm
before
saying.
I
You only known him for 20 years of your adult life.
knew the person he was before me, and only some parts of the person who he was after. So
Yeah.
Jerry and me, having gone to college with him, have a much more grander scope on it. And that's one thing that's made me a little bit sad, and why earlier today I said I'm sorry for splitting my attention, but
No, you're good, dude.
I almost have
fine.
to help them come to terms with it, because my dad is getting very frustrated over very silly, as most people would say, silly things, and they're coming to me almost as if I'm the counselor and being like, oh man, this happened today, and I'll be like, oh, you saw that part today. I'm sorry that you had to see that, and I do feel like I'm just apologizing. I'm sorry you have to see that. This is how I typically behave. This is what I try to do, and this is the way that I move around it, because I don't want to, in a sense, make him feel guilty for it. In a way,
Yeah.
If I could give him the nicest send off, I would. I don't want him, if he's saying that he doesn't think he's going to last long, I think that at the end of your life, the mental part is a huge aspect of that. If mentally you decide to give up, I think you can essentially flip the off switch to your body.
Yeah, no, you definitely will, and you definitely can. Like I told you, I definitely
So I
think you
never
guys
want-
need to go and try and get him some lion's mane fungi. But also, too, if he's really feeling that way, Brett, I mean, I wonder how your mom and you would discuss maybe a actual medical trial with psilocybin. Look up if there's any in your state, or even in another state, and have him go to even John Hopkins. I know they ran a bunch of them. Maybe they're still running some, or there's one somewhere that you can go have him participate in that could actually help him, come to better terms with his end of life.
It's very hard to get him to go to any sort of doctor's appointment, and he gets very frustrated about certain things. One day, since he had bypass surgery, he showed his bypass scar to my mother and said, "Did something happen to my lungs?"
Oh my god.
She was like, "No." And he's like, "Why do I have this big scar?" She's like, "You had heart surgery." He's like, "What?" But I've also heard him throw that back in her face, saying, "You guys had me cut open." Well, I didn't just wake up and decide to play like Operation on my dad. Like that was
Oh no, yeah, but that's
what was
just
supposed.
that's just because he doesn't have the mental capacity to actually remember and to, digest what happened.
So
and
these are the
regurgitate it.
lines that I'm trying to dance around a little bit.
Yeah, and no, that has to be difficult, definitely.
There's some cognitive things going around, and the only it's not. I don't think that most people could realistically do. I don't think today, you right now, is there much that you could do? I think the only thing that realistically you could do is occasionally send like my mom a text message or a card that said like Merry Christmas, or a text that said I love you or something, or thing. I think would just be small things. Realistically, most people can't do anything to change it. But I just wish sometimes people were more aware of it.
Yeah.
For me, it's a reality. For other people, it's an idea.
Yeah. No, and I think it's just about talking to him. I
I
think
do-
once you talk to him, he'll understand more. Maybe he won't, but What have you been doing with like your mom to kind of keep her busy, and or even what have you been doing to stay busy? Like what video games you been playing to keep your mind off this stuff, or like what have you been doing? Have you been looking for a job or anything? Have you been looking for a new job, or are you just
Go
still
back to school for optometry.
going to school for time? Nice. Okay, so
I haven't started, but I'm trying to get my parents into the idea that I'd like to do it. My mother's idea is when my dad passes, we're moving back to Chicago. If she outlives my father, we'll move back to Chicago. So that partially dictates it. I don't know that I'd really want to stay here. I think if I was to stay out west, I'd rather be in certain parts of California, but that's a whole mess because the only reason I would stay here is for like certain marching bands or something like that. I would like to work for it's almost like most of the good marching bands, like 60% of all good marching bands are from the Midwest where we live.
yeah. What are you throwing out the Illuminati over there?
Small amount on the East Coast in Florida. Texas bands are powerful, but they're not always that good. And then there's some California bands, bro, but in the right parts of California, and I don't live in those areas.
Yeah.
So like the best competition that I could even go to would be in Las Vegas, but that's 450 miles away.
Yeah. It's a bit of a drive.
That's not realistic from where I live to work or deal with. So I'd like to go back to school for optometry. No matter where I go, you will always need contacts. I will always want some cool ass glasses unless I'm doing some sporty ass shit. I actually got new glasses a while ago. Real quick, hold on.
Man, it's almost 3 in the morning. Whoo! We're going to have to wrap this up here in a couple minutes.
No, you can't see my butt. You can't see the mirror.
No, I said it's almost 3 in the morning. I said we're going to have to wrap this up here soon.
Yeah, sure. You're familiar with these?
Yeah.
Had like 5 pairs of them.
That's one thing about you. You stick with stuff for sure.
Back when I was in high school, I wore these.
Yeah. I remember those.
And then I got these. I think these are a lot nicer. Hand me a book.
Got the turtle going on.
I like these. They're turtle. I like turtles.
The tortoise said.
But these are a better prescription, and I can smash these around a little bit better. But
yeah.
Thanks for hanging out with me.
No, yeah, man, it was nice talking to you, dude. Freaking.
If I can chat more or something.
No, we'll definitely do this again, dude. And I enjoy getting your perspective on stuff.
Almost if there was a way where instead of just smoking pot and talking about whatever comes to mind, is there a script where we could talk about where we are talking about the pyramids, evolution, Darwin? I know they sort of bleed together, but could we have like a script where
I don't know about a script, but I'm down to do a topic. I don't want to do scripted stuff.
You can branch off on the topic, but stay within the topic, and we can branch off the topic.
See, I just like having the conversations and like letting them go wherever they go. I wouldn't mind us, splitting ways and diving into a specific topic. Like we give each other a week, we watch a couple documentaries of the similar fashion. And then discuss those things. I'm very into that, and maybe some emerging things, or maybe some current events and stuff like that.
The way that I my parents is somehow interesting or relevant. I'll talk about that, but then to some ways, I'd like to keep the narrative. Like as we drive down the road, we can talk about the scenery, but I'd like to stay on
On
the
a topic.
road.
Yeah, no, I
A little
get
like
that. I just I
moving towards.
if I do, like I said, I plan on having uh specific individuals on that I'll stay on specific topics with because that's what their specialty is. But I think when I'm just sitting here talking with friends and stuff like that, I would like to keep it pretty free
Oh my
form.
god, that could probably be a steal
But
on, but I'm not funny. But he's getting annoying to me. But
but um I have no what I would say is we can discuss this more too off air. But I don't want to have scripts, and because I want everything to be authentic and I want stuff to come from the heart. I don't want
yeah,
things to be so
almost like I poured
cold.
that about,
Yeah.
and that's what I would
And
like
we
to
kept it to a general topic pretty much. We kept it almost. We talked about a little bit of
until
almost everything that I want to talk about on this podcast, and so that's why I'm going to use this episode as my first episode in opposed to just specifically talking about sound and or water, which I was going to do water then
and you
sound,
know
but
what? If
sound
anybody
is
that
something we
knows,
can dive into. That was going to be my next topic was sound and crystals. So if you want to do some research on either of those, and then we can come together again and talk about it. If you want to do crystals, that's something I don't think you know anything about that I've honestly become so into. I've joined this little VIP crystal club to do reviews on them, and I truly do believe on the harmony of them. And you being a musician, you can speak to sound
well, my
a
well,
lot. So I
well,
think me and you should
version
discuss
of
sound. That's what it is. Dude, you're a musician, Brett. Like
my
we're sitting here
favorite.
talking about things that oh, you're experts in. You were a
Well,
competition
so my
marimba
uncle who
player.
lives here,
That's what we should be talking about.
my uncle who lives here in Reno. My favorite fossil in his collection. It's a yellow dragonfly, and apparently, like 4.3 million years ago, it like landed on a fucking rock, and just crystals grew over it.
Huh.
He sold it, and I'm so pissed about it. He's got dinosaur bones. He's got crystals that grow inside of crystals. He has one crystal that is so fine it almost looks like human hair. And I asked him, like, Uncle Rob, when you move, how do you move that? Like, I feel like if I sneeze, I'm gonna break it. And he's like, well, every time you move it, it does break. It's literally just a crystal where it is so fine. I can send you some text messages shortly after this when I get my phone powered back on, but which I can actually charge now. Some of them are so fine. Like one of my favorite things, another favorite in my collection of his was it's just a piece of fluoride. Like it's not fancy. It's just a piece of fluoride, but I like that it's like a pentagonal column that's like very like pinky purple.
That's what this is. This is fluoride. And hold on, 1 second.
They got the coolest shit. Well, my uncle has the coolest shit. I'm on my tablet. It
Here,
has
check
my
this out.
picture. Hold on. I only have like 4 more pictures left from my tablet. Do it.
So I use these.
I have 6. Select. Ryan Porter. All right, I'm putting video back on. I apologize.
You're good. All right. So look at.
Yeah, I've heard you the whole.
I have more of these, but yeah, these are different crystals that I have. I know I'm a dork for it, but I truly do believe that the vibrational tones of these, or the vibrations of these, and the resonance of these crystals have effects on us. I'm gonna go put these back. Give me 1 second.
I understand. I understand what you're saying. Talking about music, yes, I get that.
And so, what My first episode was gonna be about sound, or water, and then sound. And so what we'll do is the next episode we have, I'm gonna send you some videos to watch.
You're really crackling. Let me.
It's okay. What we'll do is I'm gonna log off here. I'll give you a call
Maybe
after
because
this.
I had my photos open.
Maybe, but you know what? Thank you for spending the time. We did talk for over 3 hours, and so I appreciate that. Everyone, my name is Ryan Porter Sosa. This has been the Sound of Sosa. I look forward to seeing everyone again, and please remember to follow, like, subscribe, and any kind words or any unkind words, please feel free to share them. Any ideas you want us to discuss. I'm here to spread information. Where I obtained a lot of this information was called The Secret of Water on Gaia. It is a streaming service that I highly suggest to anyone who is interested in ancient civilizations, crystals, sound. Gaia is an amazing network, everyone. Please go out and check them out. Great service. I could watch it for days on end. If you love documentaries, it's for you. Again, my name is Ryan Porter Sosa, and this is the Sound of Sosa.